Hey folks, welcome back. It's spooky season, so just like last year, I wanted to do a October focused on spooky and scary and horror-based RPGs. So I thought I'd start with one of the classics and one of the prides of my collection, which is this deluxe edition of Vampire the Masquerade 20th Anniversary Edition. Now this says the Grand Masquerade here on the title, New Orleans 2011. So this version of the deluxe edition was distributed only at the Grand Masquerade convention in New Orleans in 2011, which I obviously wasn't at because I was living here in the UK. But I was very lucky and managed to find a copy of this online for a very reasonable price. I'm a huge Vampire the Masquerade fan. I have been since the, I would say, mid-90s, around when second edition came out. It was a big deal when Vampire the Masquerade came out. I mean, the environment for RPGs, it was diversifying a lot by that time, but D&D was still, of course, the big player, and same as today, pretty much. But Vampire came along and really shifted the landscape because suddenly we had a game that was appealing to a wide range of people that normally wouldn't be into RPGs, like goths and sort of disaffected high school kids in general. It was a whole new kind of vibe, and the game itself was completely different from D&D in its focus and its mechanics, and the game very explicitly focused on telling stories and creating drama, and it was branded as a game of personal horror. And it was also the first game where you really played as a monster. I mean, you were a vampire, a creature of the night, lurking about and draining the blood of your victims in order to survive. And along with that, you gained certain amazing powers and abilities, but in order to fuel them, you needed the blood of the living. So that internal conflict and trying not to give yourself over to what they called the beast, which was the curse of Cain placed upon all the vampires that made them hungry and desperate to feed on blood, or vitae as it was known, in order to fuel their powers and keep themselves alive. This was a whole new kind of gameplay loop, and it was much more about telling personal stories and telling political stories about the slimy underground over which the vampires had control in most of the major cities. And it was a really, really cool and interesting time to be involved in this game. There were loads of groups springing up that were playing live action roleplay, and eventually official rules were released for that. And the game also introduced some other new elements like the meta plot. So this was the idea that as the game released new additions and new supplements, the sort of underlying plot line of what was happening between the different clans of vampires would change and evolve, and your game could kind of change and evolve alongside that. Some people felt that the meta plot was constricting and too many powerful NPCs were doing all the heavy lifting to change the world, but you know, as with any RPG, you can take or leave that stuff as much as you like, but a lot of the supplements, it must be said, were colored by that meta plot, and so it was kind of difficult to extricate yourself from it. But on the 20th anniversary of the release of the game, which was originally in 1991, was the first edition, wonderful people over at Onyx, the holders of the World of Darkness license at the time, the sort of umbrella of RPGs under which Vampire the Masquerade exists, decided to put out this wonderful 20th anniversary edition, which sort of took together all the best parts of the original game, updated everything to a sort of cleaned up version of the rules for what was called Revised Edition, basically the third edition of the original game, and crammed it all together into this massive tome. Now you can see it's quite thick. We're talking about 450 pages or so. It has a lovely spine here where you can see Vampire the Masquerade with two X's to indicate the 20th anniversary, and this lovely sort of patch here with V20 marked on there. And there's nothing at all on the back, so it's just a leather-bound grimoire with lovely silver-lined pages to put on your shelf. It's also got two woven-in bookmarks here, so you can keep track of things. It's a wonderful piece of artistry in terms of bookmaking. It's a lay-flat binding, you know, everything you want in the deluxe edition. And the fact that this one is particularly hard to get just means that it holds a particular place of pride on my shelf. Without any further ado, we'll get into it. One of the things, you can see the Ankh here, definite part, the visual theming of Vampire the Masquerade, a storytelling game of personal horror. And those of you who were around for second edition and Revised Edition will recognize even the fonts and stuff are calling back to that era. And as well as the artwork, we have this wonderful black and white moody line art. It opens up with a bunch of quotations from key people in the Vampire the Masquerade movement and design crew over the years and how the game affected them, which is a nice little touch, kind of personalizes the whole thing. And then we have the table of contents. You can see the appendix starts on page 479. So it's a big chunky tome. What's great about this book is that it does bring together kind of everything you need to know about Vampire the Masquerade in its classic form, and kind of divorces it from the overall meta plot that was leading up to what they called Gehenna in the original editions, which was kind of apocalypse, basically. Currently, of course, we now have the 5th edition of Vampire the Masquerade, which is being published by Renegade Studios. Now, when you ask somebody, what should I do to start playing Vampire the Masquerade? Should I play 20th Anniversary Edition or should I play 5th Edition? I own and have played both, and my recommendation would be that 20th Anniversary Edition is overall the better value, and I prefer the systems and the clans and so forth that are described in this game as opposed to the mechanics and the evolved meta plot in Vampire the 5th Edition. Also, I think Vampire the 5th Edition's core book is really quite poorly done in terms of layout, and I mean, this book, there's a lot of lore and a lot of weight in this setting that you need to get your head around, but a good storyteller can ease you into that. As a neonate, a new vampire, you don't need to know everything right off the bat. You can ease your way into understanding the way the underworld of the vampires works and the masquerade and all that sort of stuff. With 5th edition, there's also a dice system which can force you into a rage state at almost any time and kind of derail whatever was going on in the story, which I don't enjoy that much. However, there are some really good supplements for V5. I do think it has improved a lot since the core book, so do keep that in mind. And if people are interested, I'm happy to talk more about it. I have most of the books that are in print for it, to be honest, because I wanted to see how it evolved. But my overall recommendation would be that this game, particularly if you don't mind PDFs, is the better value, because the core Vampire the Masquerade book for 5th edition, you only get the 7 clans of the Camarilla. In this book, you get every clan, everything. All the disciplines, everything at once. There are many supplements as well, but most of them are sort of laser focused on bringing in certain elements from the old lines that you won't necessarily need. I'll talk more about this at the end, but there are a couple supplements I would say are really, really good to have, and the others are kind of, you might pick up as needed. And I'll show you actually in further videos about the 2 supplements that I think are the most important and the most interesting. But anyway, see, book 1 here is kind of the introduction to the world of Vampire the Masquerade. So we have a general intro, we have the background of the world of darkness, we have the sects and clans. So vampires are divided into, at a higher level, sects, and within those you have clans, each of which have their own characteristics. Book 2, The Becoming, it's a nice title there. This is about building characters, the disciplines that you use, which are different vampiric powers and abilities that different clans specialize in different disciplines. Then we have the game rules, systems and drama, the morality side of the game. So there is an element of trying to maintain your humanity as a vampire, which is very challenging and one of the core axes around which stories evolve in Vampire the Masquerade. And then finally we have the permutations, book 3. So this is storytelling advice. We have some antagonists, the others, and we have some information about Bloodlines. So these are other groups of vampires that are not sort of big and influential enough to be clans, but they do have their own characteristics, so they may be subsets of another clan. And then we have our appendix. Now, one thing I would say with this book, and in fact with most books published in World of Darkness, and particularly about Onyx Path, is if you're a new person to Vampire, reading the book in order might be confusing. Things are kind of in a strange order for the newcomer, and they're very explicit. If we get past the beautiful opening artwork and fiction here, there's lovely layout and cool stuff throughout this book. You see very dramatic images here that really give you that gothic punk vibe that defines this game. Right in the first paragraph, I'm going to read this out to you because it's very important to realize where they're coming from with this book. So let's face it, if you're reading this book, you almost certainly have a history with Vampire and with White Wolf storyteller games in general. We're not going to spend word count on what is role-playing or other elementary principles of the hobby. This is stuff you already know, and if you don't, there are tons of websites where you can get that information. Instead, we're going to spend more space in Vampire the Masquerade 20th Anniversary Edition on all the stuff that's usable to you, all the rules and setting that form the core of the Vampire experience, plus expanded disciplines, scores of Bloodlines, past and present, tweaked rules based on feedback from the Vampire community, and bits and pieces from here and there that should prove useful. Sure, we'll go over the central concepts of Vampire, but after that, we're going to be in high gear. So they're telling you right up front, this is not for the newbie. If you're new to role-playing games, don't start here. If you wanted to definitely play Vampire first, then you could go back and pick up an old copy of a revised edition, which does have that what is role-playing, the basic intro stuff that you would need to get started in the hobby. But I would say, though, although they pitch the game as very much for the collector, the enthusiast, the pre-existing Vampire fan, there is enough basic information in here to bring somebody into the World of Darkness, even if you don't have prior experience. And you'll see that as we flip through it. And it is going to be a flip through because this book is gigantic. So they talk about some basic stuff like live action roleplay and sort of etiquettes of that. And then there's key bits here that you need to know, like what is a vampire in Vampire the Masquerade? Masquerade. So they're called the Kindred, and they go through the kind of typical stereotypes about what a vampire is and which are true and which aren't. So vampires are immortal, true. They're living dead and must sustain themselves with the blood of the living. That's also true. Anyone who dies from a vampire's bite rises to become a vampire. That's false. A vampire has to actively choose to create a new vampire by draining all of the victim's blood and then feeding them some of their own vampiric vitae. That's called the embrace, by the way. Vampires are monsters, demonic spirits embodied in corpses. False, but also true. It's false in that they're not demons in a literal sense, but they do have what is called the beast, that sadistic hunger for living blood that is held within the vampire. And the older the vampire tends to get, the more callous and detached they feel from humanity, and the more horrific their behavior will become. So in a sense, they can become demonic and evil just by existing over many, many thousands of years of dark nights of feeding. Vampires are burned by sunlight. That's true. Vampires are repulsed by garlic and running water. That's false. Repulsed by crosses and other holy symbols. That's mostly false, but if somebody really, really believes that the cross will do something, it might hurt you. Vampires die from a stake through the heart. That's also false. Sorry, Buffy fans. However, a wooden stake through the heart will paralyze the monster until it is removed. Vampires have the strength of 10 men. They can command wolves and bats. They can hypnotize the living and heal even the most grievous wounds. True and false. So it depends, what kind of vampire you are, what clan you're into, and you can use your blood to manifest all different kinds of interesting powers, which is where we get these disciplines from. The older the vampire gets, the more powerful they will be in harnessing those powers. And the oldest vampires, the elders or the Methuselahs, the true ancients, they're almost like gods or demigods. I mean, they can do incredible things. And finally, vampires have sex. True. It's a great way to feed, but it doesn't actually feel that great for the vampire compared to what they call the kiss, which is the act of feeding on a living human being. Talk a bit about the embrace and how that works, and the hunt. So how in the modern days and nights do vampires sustain themselves? And vampires have different ways of doing that, of cultivating their mortal food. Some of them will set up herds of willing or semi-willing mortals, and they just feed a bit from them every night. Don't need to kill the herd, you just keep them around, keep them happy, and drain them as need be. Some vampires prefer to find a victim and drain them nearly to the point of death and leave them in an alleyway somewhere. There's lots of different ways you can do it. And then they talk about the jihad. So this is the basically multi-layered struggle for supremacy. The vampires have, manipulated the human world through political coups and social trends and economic warfare and all kinds of stuff. And kindred battle other kindred as well. Clans battle other clans. And these vampiric feuds have gone on forever and ever. And humans are just one of many means and pawns through which this never-ending war and struggle for supremacy goes on. Talk about how to use this book. Again, it is a little bit of an odd order. I think if you're new to the whole Vampire the Masquerade thing, I would recommend starting with chapter 3, actually. So look at character creation first, and when you encounter something you don't understand, like picking a clan, you don't know what the clans are, then go and look that bit up and read through it thoroughly and then pick that bit. When you get to disciplines, you don't know what that means, go look that up, etc. I would recommend reading chapter 1 first as well. So, get the background of the world of darkness, this background stuff about how vampires work in this world, the source material they're building from, then character creation, and build sort of outwards from there. And, introduce yourself to the rules that are relevant to your character as you put it together. So we have a nice picture of a Nosferatu here. So what is the world of darkness? Well, it's kind of a dark reflection of our own world. Everything is a little bit more spooky. Everything is a little bit more gothic. There are real monsters lurking in the night, not just vampires, but other things, werewolves, witches, ghosts and wraiths and all kinds of creepy things. The setting described itself as gothic punk. So the gothic is very much in the literary tradition of that. So, it's a world of decay and anachronisms and madness. In the tradition of gothic horror, churches look extra gothic and creepy, and everything has this sort of mood around it. The punk aspect is about the vampires kind of pushing back against this world that has doomed them to live in the shadows. This game gave you the feeling of being part of a hidden minority that couldn't reveal its true self, but you had to fight your way to make your life in that community and to live amongst the normals, the mortals. And so a lot of people got identified with that, including myself. And so the game grew and grew and became a classic of the RPG genre, and this book kind of brought it all together. So they talk about some of the key themes, and one of which I just mentioned briefly is the Masquerade. So this is kind of the foundation of the game in a sense. Once a character is embraced and they become a kindred, it's imperative that you keep that secret from everyone else. The world of the kindred has to be secret. They have to convince their prey that they don't exist and they don't hide among humans. And if you create a crack in that facade, if somebody notices that, vampires exist, that's a big problem. And the vampiric leaders, the elders and clans will go out of their way to seal those breaches in the Masquerade in whatever way is necessary. Sins of the Father is another interesting one. So it's a kind of biblical theme in a sense. The belief of many vampires is that they originated from Cain, who was the original murderer in the Bible, and he cursed Cain for murdering Abel and made him walk the earth for all eternity. And so the belief is that he and all of his descendants became the kindred. They measure their age in generations, which is the number of generations removed you are from Cain. And so second and third generation vampires are the kind of godlike antediluvians and Methuselahs that were mentioned earlier. You will generally start play as a 13th generation vampire, so you're relatively weak in the blood. Your blood's been diluted over the generations, but you can gain experience and get stronger. You can also perform the forbidden act of diablerie, where you kill a vampire of an older generation and gain their power in the process, but it leaves a stain on your soul that's visible to other supernaturals and is very, very dangerous and is one of the few things punishable by the true death if somebody finds out. We have the War of Ages. So this is the war between the Elder Kindred and the younger vampires. The Elder Kindred, have been in power for a long time, and they fear the disruptive influence of the younger. Hence, again, we get to the punk aspect a little bit. We have the inherent conflict of the setting. So we have different sects against each other. We have clans versus clans. We have everyone versus the beast inside them. There are conflicts set throughout the setting, so many hooks for role-playing and interesting things to happen. Conspiracy is another theme, so the kindred have become skilled manipulators, partially because of the need to maintain the Masquerade, but also they manipulate one another. They manipulate other vampires into doing what they want. They use their disciplines and their powers to do so, and there's a lot of vampire politics that needs to be done. And so I'd classify this game as well as a game of political horror, and I believe Vampire 5th Edition explicitly mentions that as a theme. And then there's the apocalyptic side, so the end times are here. Current generation of vampires are getting weaker and weaker. And eventually they'll get to the point where the vampires that are created will be too weak to create new vampires themselves. And so the time of the kindred will come to an end in a sense. And what are we to do after that? As far as the mood of vampire stories, there's a lot of different varieties of these. You can go for the sensual. Vampires by their nature are an allegory for physical lust in their consumption of blood. You can deal with mysteries, trying to understand the background of the kindred and the strange world in which they operate. It could be a game of danger and intensity, where you're heavily involved in sect versus sect conflict or clan versus clan conflict, fighting over territory, fighting with other kindred, fighting against mortal hunters who are looking for vampires to kill. There are tons of options for antagonists that you could fight. Or it could be a general eeriness. So the world of darkness is filled with bizarre and creepy things, and you may encounter many of them as a creature of the night yourself. And so you can make the game into one of supernatural mystery and creepiness. Then we get into a really nice description of the kindred. The aristocracy of the dead is about the elders and the general hierarchy. The beast, of course, I mentioned before, the kind of instinctive impulse within each vampire that demands to kill and feast and sleep. And that's it. However, the vampire is cursed with this beast, but must try to maintain some sort of humanity or human consciousness. Otherwise, they descend into just becoming a sort of blood-fueled monstrosity. So that struggle to maintain your humanity is a core aspect of the game, and indeed you have a stat to represent your humanity level. And it talks more about the jihad, the modern advantage. So as a young vampire, you do have certain advantages despite your lesser power compared to the elder kindred. You have technology, you have the ability to connect through technology with other people like yourselves, and these things are a mystery to the elder vampires. There are ways that you can push back against this power structure. Then they go into the social distinction. So age is, of course, the main one I've mentioned before. Fledgling is the newly embraced vampire who's not yet been formally introduced into society. You have to be kind of introduced as a debutante, like back in the Regency period or something, and when you are introduced, that's when you become a neonate. So you've been set loose from your sire, the vampire that created you and helped you understand the kindred society, and now you've been been kind of emancipated. You're an adult kindred, if you like. Before that, you're called a childer. After you've been a neonate for a while, you got a few decades or even a couple centuries under your belt, you become an ancilla. But then we have elders. Now, this is a little bit more clear in terms of power level, but it is also subjective. It could be anywhere from 200 to 1,000 years of being kindred. And by that point, you should have an appreciable amount of claim over domains and a lot of other assets and allies. So to be an elder is not just about age, but also about power and influence. Methuselahs are really crazy. So they're the ones that are between 1,000 and 2,000 years old. They become profoundly changed by this. The weight of the millennia sets in. They become very paranoid and they become sort of recluses. They retreat from the world through the desire for self-preservation. And some of them go into what's called torpor, which is a kind of a long-term sleep. They'll stay in torpor for centuries until something happens which forces them to rise. Then we have the antediluvians, which translates as before the flood. So these are believed to be the third generation vampires, those who were descended from Cain's original childer. These vampires have existed in the state of undeath for so long that they don't resemble human motivations or behavior at all anymore. And it's believed that at some point the antediluvians may rise, and some vampires believe that they will rise to destroy vampiric society, and therefore we should strike first. So a vampire's clan is basically your lineage. So when somebody embraces you, they come from a certain clan, and so you end up being embraced into that clan. It's kind of your family. The Kindred Society generally acknowledges 13 clans. Some of them have been lost in history, and you can find those in Vampire the Dark Ages 20th edition, which we'll also look at during this month. Some clans are highly organized, some are more anarchic, some are decentralized. Each has an ultimate progenitor, somebody who started the clan, and then we have a summary here of each of the clans, which I won't go into, so we'll see more of that later. Then we have the sect. Each sect has a dogma and an objective that their members seek to attain. So there are 4 different sects, effectively. So there's the Camarilla, a group of 7 clans who are adhering to the Masquerade, and they hold up to what they call the traditions, and they have an elaborate social hierarchy. The Sabbat, they hold the apocalyptic outlook, so they think that Gehenna is coming, the antediluvians are going to rise and devour everyone. They don't care about traditions, they don't care about hiding their vampiric nature, and they believe that ultimately vampires have to force their will over the mortal world instead of hiding from it. Then you have the Anarch movement, so they're localized and sporadic, as implied by their name. They believe that rule by the elders is outmoded, and that kindred should be governed by merit. In practice, though, it's a little bit different. Anarch domains tend to be run by individuals called barons, who are princes, like in the Camarilla, in all but name, basically. There's no kind of utopian plan that they have that's yet worked, but their philosophy is, I believe, admirable. Then we have the Inconu. So they're an elder sect about which little is known. They believe in what's called Golconda. So this is kind of a transcendent state of undeath that vampires can reach. You finally reach a state of peace, and it's got its roots in very ancient vampires going way, way back. And then we have the Tal Mahira, or the True Black Hand. So this is a paranoid conspiracy of a sect, and a lot of people don't think they really exist. They want to shepherd the world towards its end rather than avoid it. They don't hold any physical domains, but they actually cross over into the world of the dead. They tend to breed lots of ghoul servants, and they send those agents out into the world to do their nasty business. And then finally you have the independents. So these are like small-scale sects with their own specific agenda. And then you have the autarchists, sort of broad term for vampires that don't belong to a sect or swear fealty to a clan. So they're like hermits and outcasts. They're often not really paid much attention to, but if you don't want to toe the line, then you end up being an autarchist, and you'll have to make your own way in the world. You can make yourself valuable enough to keep the other sects at bay, however, if you're smart about it. And then we have the tradition that the Camarilla hold most dear. So the first tradition being the Masquerade. So basically, we can't reveal ourselves to the world. Second tradition is the domain. So if you have your own domain, everybody else has to respect it, and nobody can challenge your word or your ruling in your own domain. And the same goes for others' domain if you're in theirs. Then we got the third tradition of the progeny. So you can only sire another vampire with the permission of your elder. Break that rule, then both you and your childer will be slain. Fourth tradition is the accounting. So once you create your own childer, then until they're released and become a neonate, you're responsible for everything they do. So if they do something terrible, like break the Masquerade or disobey somebody's orders in the domain, that is then your problem. as well. The 5th tradition is hospitality. So if you're in another's domain, you have to honor their traditions. Without exception, should adhere to their rules. The final tradition, we have destruction. So it's forbidden to destroy another kindred. The only person who can order that is the elder, and only the eldest can call what's called a blood hunt. So that's when you're declared persona non grata amongst the vampires, and they basically set a hunt out to kill you. Then we talk about the domains of the dead and how they're organized. So within the Camarilla, in a Camarilla city, you'd have a prince who would rule the city, an archbishop if it was a Sabbat city, a baron if it's an anarch movement. And then they give you the other titles of key positions of station for each of the sects. So for the Camarilla, you have some other titles like the Harpy, the Keeper of Elysium. Elysium is like a neutral zone, and it's an enforced zone of peace. You have sheriffs who keep the peace. You have Justicaros who deal out justice. See that happening here, I suppose. In the Sabbat, you have different set of roles adhering to their different principles. And then we get into the mythology of the damned. So this is the belief that Cain was the original vampire, and that vampiric power is derived from Cain's original sin and his curse by God. And then that leads us into discussion of generations, and they describe in some detail the behaviors and colloquialisms attached to these different generations and how they're viewed by vampiric society as a whole. And then we have the concept of Gehenna, the end of the world, Golconda. Then there are short descriptions of other denizens of the world of darkness. Now these many others will recognize as having their own game lines within the world of darkness. So we have hunters. These are mostly ordinary humans. Some of them have a bit of the supernatural about them, but they have made it their mission to eliminate things like vampires, werewolves, mages, witches, all that kind of stuff. They derive from the original Inquisition. Then we've got the werewolves, also known as the lupines by the Kindred. Kindred view them as savage creatures who are mad with rage, changing into their wolf form seemingly at will and lashing out violently when someone rouses their ire. Not untrue. As we'll see in Werewolf 20th Anniversary Edition, that completely fails to capture the complexity of the werewolf life and what they really do. Then we have the magi, the mages. So these are mortals who are able to use their will to transform reality through magic. And Mage the Ascension is the original game line. It was followed up later by Mage the Awakening. And both these games were characterized by what was at the time a very unique free-form approach to magic. So you do have some set spells called rotes that are provided, but you can create spells completely from scratch, and there's a system for doing that using different sets of arcana, which we'll see when we talk about Mage 20. Then we have what the Kindred call the Wild Ones. These are the Fae, or the Changelings as they're known. They have their own game line as well, called Changeling the Dreaming, which later became Changeling the Lost in the New World of Darkness and Chronicles of Darkness, which for me, Changeling the Lost is one of the best games ever released in the World of Darkness. Then we have the Ghosts. These are the Wraiths. They have their own game line as well, known as Wraith the Oblivion, and we'll look at Wraith 20 edition as well during this series. And there are other things too. Demons, devils, mummies, shapeshifters, golems. Some have game lines of their own, like Demon the Fallen or Demon the Descent in the New World of Darkness. We have Mummy the Resurrection in the original World of Darkness and Mummy the Curse in New World of Darkness. There are other shapeshifters besides werewolf shifters in Werewolf the Apocalypse, and they're in the Changing Breed supplement, which I also have in special edition. Then we have a lexicon of all the different special terms that are used, and some archaic terms for the same things, and then vulgar slang terms like juice bag, which is what modern vampires call humans, or juice box, it says, is another version of it. Then we get into the sects and clans. So they also mention that you can limit, as a storyteller, who players can be as far as their clan allegiance. So if your game is in a Camarilla city, then the vast majority of Kindred will be from the 7 founding clans. Then you can just say, nope, be one of the 7 Camarilla clans because you're in a Camarilla city. So first they talk about the Camarilla, their main strongholds, their practices, at the heart of which are the traditions, and conclaves, which are the center of global Camarilla politics. And then we have some descriptions of the Camarilla from the viewpoint of the other main sects, the Sabbat, the Anarchs, and the Independents, who all have their own skeptical views of the Camarilla. Then we have the Sabbat in comparison. They follow their own code called the Code of Milan. The Sabbat were expanded a great deal in Revised Edition to make them a much more interesting and playable set of clans, and that has been carried over into the 20th anniversary and enhanced as well, I would say. They also will do what they call rituals, which are often out of a mockery of human religious belief, and these rituals tend to involve fire and blood and violence, even ceremonial killing. Yeah, the life of the Sabbat is pretty intense, basically. And again, we have the view of the other sects of the Sabbat themselves. Then we have the Anarch movement, their traditional strongholds, Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco. They're nominally within the Camarilla, but they're a movement within the Camarilla that says says, look, we should be more egalitarian. We should function based on merit and democracy and not just by age and hierarchy and some sort of outdated monarchist sort of view. And then, they have a nice short little summary here, and then the view from without, again, the view of the Camarilla, the Sabbat, and the independence of their movement. Then we have the independents, a sect composed of clans that don't really subscribe to the other movements at all. So among these we have the clans known as the Assamites, the followers of Set, the Giovanni, and the Ravnos. And they describe each of these clans in turn, and there are different reasons why they don't get involved. So the Assamites, for example, are a clan of assassins, basically. So they prefer to stay separate and neutral. Followers of Set, they consider themselves of an older lineage than either the Camarilla or the Sabbat. They think that they go back to the times of ancient Egypt, and so they worship the being Set in the Egyptian mythology, although in a kind of perverted form. We have the Giovanni, practitioners of necromancy. So they feel that they don't need protection from the Masquerade. They survived many centuries without the protection of the Masquerade, and so they don't think they need to be in part of a sect. And then we have the Ravnos, who are the masters of illusion, and in fact one of their clan disciplines, as you'll see, is chemistry, which is the art of creating illusion. And then we have a view of the independents from the other three main sects as well. And then we get into the clans themselves, and in the traditional way of Vampire the Masquerade books, each clan gets a lovely 2-pager here. We have an explanation of who they are, their nickname, what sect they're in, if any, their general appearance, what they prefer to wear, and what they generally look like, the kinds of havens that they will maintain, so, what are their safe places and how do they organize and handle them, their background, what are the people they tend to embrace into the clan, character creation, so some advice about how to build a good Assamite, which is an assassin, their clan disciplines are very important, so here they have celerity, obfuscate, and quietus. Quietus is specifically beneficial for stealth and assassination. Celerity allows you to increase your speed massively to inhuman rates and break the action economy, which is really powerful. And obfuscate helps you hide yourself. Each clan also has a weakness. So due to the Tremere blood curse, should an Assamite consume the blood of another kindred, she suffers 1 automatic level of unsoakable lethal damage per blood point imbibed. So they're telling you something quite mechanical before you've actually learned any of the mechanics. So again, that's why I recommend you sort of start with the character creation chapter and work your way through the steps of character creation, and then look at the clans as you need to, then look at the disciplines. Build up your knowledge of the rules. Don't just read the book straight through. So the reading order of a vampire book or a World of Darkness book is always going to be a little bit strange. And then we have some notes about their organization as a clan, and finally their views and stereotypes about all the other clans in the book, which I think is really cool. That's always been part of the Vampire the Masquerade presentation, and it gives a player of that clan an immediate idea of what does their lineage think about all the other main vampire lineages, and that helps you understand their place in the world as a new character. Then we got the Bruja, rebels and provocateurs. They're nicknamed the Rabble, generally reflecting an attitude of rebellion. So they might have multicolored hair or spikes or rivets or fetish gear. They're creatures of passion. They often embrace without really thinking much about it. They focus their disciplines on celerity, potence, which is making yourself super strong, and presence, which is influencing people basically by your gravitas, if you like. And their weakness is that they have a lot of passion, which can lead to depravity. The difficulty of roles to resist or guide frenzy are too higher than normal. Again, we don't know what frenzy is yet. They're stereotypes of the other clans. We have the followers of Set. So we know them to be one of the independents. They're nicknamed the Setite or the Serpents. They tend to have hidden temples for their havens, tend to follow prospective new childer for the followers of Set for a while before choosing whether they should be one of their kindred. They often look for outsiders or loners or other marginalized people. Clan disciplines are obfuscate, hiding yourself, presence again, and serpentis, which is a unique discipline for the followers of Set, which is about reptilian transformations. It's very interesting. Their weaknesses, so given their origins in darkness, the serpents react negatively to bright light. So they get even more damage from sunlight than other vampires. 2 health levels of additional damage by exposure to sunlight. They can also lose 1 dice from dice pools for action taken in bright light of any kind, even at nighttime. And we have their stereotypes as well. We have the gangrels. So the gangrels, they love to stalk their prey. They nominally belong to the Camarilla. They're big on hunting. They're big on sort of an animalistic, more primal approach to vampirism. Their havens, they lair wherever they can, taking refuge whenever the sun starts to rise, they may just grab an illegal squat or abandoned building. If they do build up an actual haven, it'll be someplace like that. Their clan disciplines are animalism, which allows them to connect with and control animals, fortitude, which helps their defenses, and protean, which allows them to change their physical characteristics. Their weakness is that every time a gangrel frenzies, she acquires a temporary animal characteristic. Players should work with the storyteller to determine what new animal trait is acquired. There are definite connections to, the beast and an aspect of the wild to the gangrels. Then we have the Giovanni. I love the Giovanni. They're part of the Independents. Their nickname is the Necromancers because that's what they do. They tend to dress with subtlety and taste. They tend to take havens in villas or lavish estates, and they often have a lot of valuables in their havens like fine art or grand jewelry. Clan disciplines, they have Dominate, which is an excellent one that allows you to hold others in your sway through a kind of mind control. Necromancy, which allows you to deal with the dead, raise the dead, and do other things with the world beyond this life. And Potence, which gives them great strength. Their weakness is that the kiss of a Giovanni causes excruciating pain to mortals who receive it. So they have to be very careful when feeding. If they don't do it carefully, their vessel may die of shock and agony before they even finish feeding. In order to reflect that mechanically, so when a Giovanni feeds upon a mortal, they do twice as much damage as the kiss of another vampire. As a result, they tend to use things like blood banks and blood bags from, hospitals and so forth to feed, because they do tend to get a lot of pushback when they feed on a mortal, because it hurts a lot when they feed. Then we have the La Sombra, another interesting clan. So they consider themselves a kind of dark nobility, an aristocracy of the night. There's a lovely video from the Gentleman Gamer, Matthew Dawkins, who has been a developer on many products in the Onyx Path line, including Curseborn, which is currently crowdfunding and recommend you look into if you're a fan of the World of Darkness. And he's done a video recently about the La Sombra, which I recommend checking. They kind of see themselves as the clan that likes to win. So they will manipulate things so that they appear to be the most powerful vampire in the room, no matter what. So they tend to have communal havens with other members of their pack. Wealthier keepers and those who predate the sect will often maintain their own havens, whether sinister penthouse suites or sprawling old world villas. They seek both erudition and ambition in their potential childer, so they often get people from professional backgrounds, people with outgoing or even aggressive personalities. Their clan disciplines, they have Dominate, again the mind control, which is great. Obtenebration is their unique clan discipline. This is about control of the shadows. It's very creepy and very cool. A lot of people are attracted to La Sombra for that discipline. And Potence, which is always useful. Their weakness is that La Sombra vampires, as per the old legends, cast no reflections, which makes them have to be a little bit extra careful around mortals. Then we have the Malkavians. They're an interesting one. So they are considered twice damned, according to the book. They're cursed to be a kindred, and again, by having essentially become demented. They have a certain type of insanity, a fracture within their mind, which they can actually pass on to others, and for that reason, their nickname is the Lunatics. They offer unorthodox perspectives, however, that can be useful, and for that reason, they are tolerated by the Camarilla, and the clan has always supported the Ivory Tower, as the Camarilla is sometimes known. The Malkavians, they come from a variety of backgrounds, but because of their madness, they tend to present in a fairly extreme form. They may appear disheveled, injured, or just filthy. They may have been wearing the same clothes since the day they died. They're not really focused on cleanliness or style or fashion. And their havens and backgrounds as well are all over the place. They make a haven almost anywhere, basically, wherever they think they can. And they embrace people from all economic and cultural strata, but most of them will have some sort of black secret that caused their sire to catch notice of them. Disciplines are really useful. So they have Auspex, which allows you to have a supernatural sight. They have Dementation, which can cause mental ill health in others, sort of transferring their insanity to others. And they have Obfuscate, which allows them to hide in the shadows. Their weakness is their permanent incurable derangement. So they can acquire other derangements, and they can spend their willpower, one of the vampiric resources, to ameliorate their effects of their derangement for a scene, but they can never recover from that original derangement with them permanently. Other vampires can be temporarily deranged by things like dementation, but they can recover. Not so for the Malkavians. We got the Nosferatu. Look at this ugly bastard over here. These guys are hideous. That's their main thing. But because they're hideous, they're very good at hiding, and they're very good at trading in secrets. They're nicknamed the Sewer Rats because they hide underground and in dirty, filthy places where nobody goes. They use that ability to hide and to obfuscate their presence to be traders in information. Their appearance is unsettling, gnarled limbs, weird fangs, hellish faces, spasmodic appendages, all kinds of crazy stuff. And they tend to construct havens in places like the sewers or condemned churches or all that kind of stuff. And their clan disciplines reflect this kind of origin. So animalism is useful to them as they tend to live in abandoned places where humans don't tread and other vampires don't tread. So they have obfuscate as well to help hide their hideousness, and potence to deal out hefty damage if they are threatened. Their weakness is that they have an appearance score of 0 and they may never improve it. So this is an attribute on your character sheet which is going to be 0 forever. Any dice pool that uses the appearance trait is going to be inherently difficult because normally when you make a roll in this game, you add a number of dots in an attribute and a number of dots in the relevant skill or discipline you're trying to use. So if you need to use appearance as your attribute, it's always going to be 0 for these guys, and there's nothing you can do to change that. That's the downside of their clan. Now the Ravnos, they're like the thieves in the night, considered outsiders and thus independents, and their nickname is the Deceivers. Their appearance, they tend to come from Eastern European backgrounds. They tend to be sort of nomadic instead of having permanent havens, perhaps because of their reputation, and their clan disciplines reflect this Deceiver nickname. So animalism, again, a useful tool when you're outsiders to human and vampiric society. Chemistry, this is the art of creating illusions that I mentioned earlier, and also fortitude, so they can build up their resistance to damage. And we have their stereotypes as well, and they're a far-flung clan, it's worth saying. So they're kind of decentralized. Even promises to one another are not really trusted. So they definitely are creatures who love to lie, cheat, and steal. Then we've got the Toreadors. So these are the kind of trend makers. They fancy themselves as the most fashionable and the most decadent of the Camarilla culture. And in fact, they're nicknamed the Degenerates for that reason. Almost to the last, the Toreador tend to be attractive. It could be either the traditional beauty of like a model or something more dangerous and predatory, but in any sense, they have an arresting appearance. Their havens tend to be expensive and filled with many beautiful works of art, as befitting their self-styling as trend makers. They tend to embrace people from high society or bohemian backgrounds, and actors, singers, musicians, sculptors, poets, that kind of thing. Their clan disciplines, they have Auspex, which is the supernatural sight. They have Celerity, which is supernatural speed, and Presence, which reflects their ability to turn heads when they enter a room. But they do have a weakness when they encounter something truly remarkable, whether that be a person, some piece of art, or a beautiful sunrise, which is obviously very dangerous for a vampire. The player has to make a self-control or instincts roll at difficulty 6. If they fail, then the kindred is enthralled by the experience and somebody has to shake them out of it. If they're enraptured in this way, they can't defend themselves, even if they're being burned or attacked or whatever. So very dangerous. If you know that about the Toreador and you're from another clan, that could be very useful. Then we got the Tremere. So these are kind of the sorcerers of the vampiric world, if you like. They practice the art of blood magic, thaumaturgy, and they're known as the Warlocks for that reason. They consider themselves one of the pillars of the Camarilla because of their unique power, and their ability to master blood sorcery makes them highly influential and also dangerous. Most Tremere rely on a central chantry the clan maintains in cities where it has a notable presence, and more solitary warlocks will have private havens. They tend to be focused on mental attributes and willpower, but they'll be lacking in conscience and conviction and physical strength. But their clan disciplines are very good. So they've got Auspex for supernatural sight, which can help keep them safe and knowledgeable. They have Dominate to control the will of others, and they have Thaumaturgy, which is the blood magic, which has a huge amount of utility and power. Their weakness, however, is that their dependency on blood is even more pronounced than other kindred. It only takes 2 drafts of another vampire's blood for a Tremere to become bloodbound instead of the normal 3. So again, we don't know about the blood bond yet. It's on page 286. We're only on page 69. This means that the Tremere can be more easily bonded to other kindred, and that blood bond holds a lot of power and sway over them. Then we have the Zemiche. Very interesting spelling. I'm going with the pronunciation that Matthew Dawkins uses here, which I assume is the correct one. And they're known as the Fiends because they have a very strange discipline called vicissitude. And this allows them to basically craft the skin and bone of their victims, or even themselves. It's very creepy and weird, and they do lots of crazy stuff with it. And they can manipulate their own appearance, so they can make themselves frightening, they can make themselves look extreme or nightmarish, and yeah, they creep a lot of people out. Few Zemiche know moderation, and thus they often favor physical or mental attributes, usually with one extraordinarily high trait. Knowledge is usually favored, though skills are valued as well. Clan disciplines, they've got animalism, so they have control over the animal world. They've got Auspex, and then they have vicissitude, which is their flesh crafting. Their weakness, so they're inextricably tied to their domain domains of origin and must rest in the proximity of at least 2 handfuls of native soil. So that's bits of soil from their place most important to them as a mortal. So their birthplace, or the graveyard where you underwent your embrace, that kind of thing. Each night spent without this physical connection to the land limits all of the Tzimisce's dice pool to 1/2 cumulatively until she only has a single die in her pool, and it will remain that way until you rest for a full day amid your native soil once more. So that's a really serious problem. If somebody steals your native soil, that's got to be your primary focus to get that back. Then we have the Ventrue. These are kind of the self-styled rulers and blue bloods of the Camarilla. In fact, the nickname is the Blue Bloods. They prefer to be kind of synthesis of the modern and the ancient. So if you imagine a mix of the old style of aristocracy mixed with modern corporatism, that's the Ventrue in a sense. And they, for that reason, tend to seek out people who've made something of themselves before they groom them for the embrace. So people with money, corporate wonderkins, leaders of the military or political leaders. Their disciplines, they have dominate, fortitude, and presence. All of them help reinforce their status as the leaders and tastemakers. They have rarefied tastes, however, which is their weakness. So only one specific type of mortal blood is viable for them. So when a player creates a Ventrue, they have to decide with a storyteller what specific type of blood suits the character. So blood of any other type, even animals, gives them no blood pool increase no matter how much you consume. This refined palette could be narrow or broad. The only exception is that vampiric blood is exempt and will always nourish the Ventrue. So be careful about that. And then we have their stereotypes, and those are all the clans. So again, compared to V5, V20 as this is known, gives you all the clans right from the beginning. V5 makes you buy several books in order to get all the clans, which is a big problem in my opinion. And also, Renegade has a bad PDF policy, as does Onyx Path, to be honest. The PDFs are not included with the books unless you do a Kickstarter, and the Kickstarters have extremely unfriendly shipping policies for non-US people, which is at this point basically unforgivable because lots of smaller companies have done EU and UK friendly Kickstarters. Onyx Path still doesn't, and there's just no excuse for it. But they make good stuff, so I end up with eventually buying their things, usually from the secondary market, which is a problem, obviously, because they're not getting my money that way. So then we get into characters and traits. So this is where we get into the character creation stuff, and they outline the character sheet here. You'll see here there's 3 sets of attributes and 3 attributes within each set. So you got physical attributes, social, and mental. Within physical, you have strength, dexterity, and stamina. In social, you have charisma, manipulation, and composure. And in mental, you have perception, intelligence, and wits. And these will be often rolled together with your talent, skills, or knowledges if you're trying to roll for something. And everything is measured in dots. And then under abilities, you have your talents, special abilities that set you apart from other people. So your ability to do things like brawl or athletic feats, intimidate others, perform acts of subterfuge, etc. Then you have your skills, which is things like your connection with animals, your craftiness, your etiquette, your firearms abilities, your melee abilities, stealth, and survival. Knowledges, these are informational abilities. So you have an academic classification, you have computer knowledge, finance, law, medicine, occult, science, technology, etc. Then you have your disciplines, backgrounds. These are your material assets and your social network, which is really cool. So, do you have followers? Do you have a herd? Do you have a haven? That kind of stuff. Then you have merits and flaws as well. So these you can use to kind of finesse your character creation. Merits you can buy for points. Flaws will give you back points, but then you have a problem that you need to roleplay. Then you have your humanity or other path. This is kind of your trending towards full consumption by the beast. You have your willpower, which is your character's inner drive to succeed at particular tasks. You have your blood pool, which is built up by feeding. And then you have your health track. So this is one of the other unique things that Vampire brought in for somebody coming from D&D at the time. So instead of having hit points, you have these sort of health boxes, and as you move down these different statuses, you take damage of different types. You have bashing damage, where you just put a single slash diagonally across the box. Lethal damage, you make an X. Aggravated damage is a star, so you can do that by just adding lines. As you take bashing damage, you'll get beat up, and then you can be incapacitated. If you take lethal damage, it'll take longer to recover. Aggravated damage, it doesn't go away without some special hard work. And each step you move down the damage track will remove dice from your pool. So you start out just bruised, nothing happens. At hurt or injured, you lose 1 die from your dice pool, whatever pool you're rolling. Wounded is also -2. At mauled, -2. At crippled, you go to -3, and then you get incapacitated. You can also put your clan weakness and your experience points on the sheet as well. So everything pretty much that you need can fit in 1 page, but there is a really nice 4-page interactive character sheet, which you can get for free online. And in fact, if you want really specialized character sheets for any World of Darkness game, search for Mr. Gone character sheets. This is a website that has literal thousands of character sheets and is not an exaggeration for World of Darkness and Chronicles of Darkness. It's an amazing service for the community, so please do go and use his character sheets. The 4-pagers just give you more stuff to describe, what your background and social network stuff actually does, what weapons or other items you might have, and so on. To start making a character, so you start with a character of any age, but they expect you normally to start as a neonate, so you're a kind of a newborn vampire, and you get between 0 and 35 experience points to spend on your various traits. And as you would expect, your trait values go between 1 and 5. They can go higher if you are playing, Elders or Methuselahs or something, and there are specialized sheets for that on Mr. Gone's website, so do look for that. What's nice here is that they show you right off the bat, if you want to play as an Ancilla, an experienced vampire, you start between 75 and 220 experience points. Elders between 250 and 600, and Methuselahs at 1,000 plus. I would say Elder is pretty much where you want to top out. It'd be very hard to run a compelling game for Methuselahs. I think they're just too powerful. Elders are already stretching the boundaries. You'd be dealing with global level threats at that point. For me, Neonates or Ancilla are where it's at. If you've got experienced players, maybe jump into Ancilla play right away and get into fights over domains and princes and territory and all that. You'll be ready for that. If you're a newbie, definitely start as a Neonate would be my advice. Elder games are fun to try every now and again, but it's not something I would do all the time. So then there's a whole character process laid out for you. So you choose your concept, clan, nature, and demeanor. So then I would say, go look those things up in the book, find out what they are, come back. Then you select your attributes and you prioritize them as your primary, secondary, and tertiary. And your primary, you get 7 dots, your secondary 5 dots, and your tertiary 3 dots. Then you select your abilities and you give 13 dots to whichever you prioritize the most out of talent, skills, and knowledges. 9 points to your second place one and 5 points to your third. No ability can be higher than 3 at this stage of the process. Then you choose 3 disciplines, up to 5 backgrounds, and 7 dots of virtues, and your character automatically has 1 dot in each virtue. Then you get your finishing touches, so you get your derived attributes, so your humanity, which is equal to your conscience and self-control, willpower, which is equal to your courage, and your blood pool. Then you get 15 freebie points, which you can add to anywhere you like, and then you get merits and flaws, which are optional, max 7 points at this stage. And then they give you some sample sort of character concepts, like who you started out as before you became a vampire. Then they give you a brief summary of the clans, in case you want to jump right in, but of course I recommend looking at the section we just looked at to get more detail. Then some example archetypes, so nature and demeanor. This is another interesting duality in the system. So your nature is who you truly are, and your demeanor is what you project to the outside world. And again, I think that's something a lot of people can relate to if they consider themselves as kind of somewhat out of the norm. Then they describe the different disciplines. And then backgrounds, you have your allies that you could have. You could spend dots for an alternative identity with documentation. You could be a member of the Black Hand if you're in the Sabbat, which means you have Black Hand contacts who can help you get horrible stuff done. You might have contacts in the mortal worlds. You might have a domain, so you have a feeding ground that's acknowledged by the local kindred society. You might have fame amongst mortals for various reasons. You spend points on generation, so if you want to give yourself a higher generation number to have access to more power, you can do that. You can get yourself a herd, which is very useful, so this gives you bonuses to your hunting rolls when you need to determine how much blood is in your blood pool on a given night. Having a herd will give you free and safe access to extra blood. You can have influence, so that's your measure of political power in mortal society. You could have a mentor, so a kind of kindred patron who supports you. You could have resources like wealth, belongings, and so forth. Retainers, which would be like followers and servants or guards. You can have rituals, again, if you're a Sabbat. And you can have status, which is your overall standing in undead society. And then they give you freebie points cost. So you get 15 freebie points at the end of the character generation process. This gives you the cost for each additional dot that you would spend out of those points. And then they go through each step in more detail, which we'll skip over. It is useful here to read the bit about nature and demeanor, I think, as well. And really all of this is key. I mean, it gives you the basic background you need to understand the character generation process, and also gives you lots of page references. It tells you where to look for the rules that you need for each thing. So character generation in this chapter is the place to start if you're brand new to Vampire and you want to get a kind of systematic understanding of the rules and systems at play. Then they go through the archetypes. Now, some archetypes would be better suited for some clans than others, as we've seen from the description of the clans. Quite a few of them here, along some creepy artwork there. Yep, still going on with archetypes. Then we have descriptions of the attributes and also the ability to have specialties. So if you have a rating of 4 or higher in an attribute or ability, you can choose a specialty. That's a particular subcategory. So for example, if you have a strength of of 5, then maybe you have a specialty in deadlifting. And then if you have that specialty and you make a die roll which uses it, you can count any die that comes up 10 as 2 successes instead of 1. And they talk about the dot levels of each attribute, what they represent. Quite useful to understand what kind of feats you could perform with those different levels in each attribute. Then we have the abilities. So we start with talents, which includes the things like athletics, awareness, brawl, expression, intimidation, which can be very useful, streetwise and subterfuge, also very useful. And then skills. So animal behavior, understanding, which is animal ken, crafts, craftsmanship, etiquette, firearm skill can be very important depending on how much conflict is going to be in your chronicle. Melee skills, stealth, performance, stealing stuff, and then survival skills, and then you have knowledges. So these are your informational skills like academics, investigation, computers, occult, politics, science, etc. And then your background. So these are what I mentioned before. You have your allies, alternate identity, and it gives you, again, really good examples of what each dot means if you add points to these backgrounds. All this stuff is useful. I think people often neglect spending points on things like contacts or domains or whatever, but all of that not only gives you lots of role-playing fodder because you have something to defend, something that's yours, but it also gives you some significant benefits. So, having a big domain is really helpful. And you can also pool points with your party to establish a joint domain, which is really cool. Fame can be useful if you want to maintain some kind of influence in the mortal world. Generation is useful because you can get more blood points in your pool and potentially spend more blood points per turn on your discipline. And herd rating adds dice to your roll for hunting. Influence, so this is your influence within politics, anywhere from just locally to global politics. Your mentor, resources, retainers, rituals, and only if you're Sabbat, and then your status in the undead world. And then it explains how to pool backgrounds with your other players. Then you got your virtue traits. So this is determined by your path, a particular code of ethics you follow. So if you follow the path of humanity, which is the Camarilla kindred mostly, then generate the value of your initial humanity by your conscience plus self-control virtues. There are other virtues and other paths, which are in chapter 7 as well. Then you've got your willpower, which is your inner drive, and your willpower pool will tend to fluctuate, and you can recover willpower over time. Willpower is measured on a 1 to 10 scale rather than 1 to 5. Then you've got your blood pool, which is how many points of vitae are in your body at the time, and that is what you use to power your disciplines. And so if you have 0 blood points, then you're likely to end up in a frenzy state where you just eat whatever you can find, and that can be disastrous. You might break the Masquerade, you might kill another vampire, bad things can happen. Then you have your health. You've got 7 different health levels, and each movement down that track, as I mentioned, will subtract dice from your pool. If the penalties leave you with no dice in a given pool, then you can't take that action at all. If you're incapacitated, you're completely immobilized, can't do anything. So that's a real killer. And they explain each of the health levels in detail. Then they talk about experience, using that to increase traits, how experience points should be awarded, and what you should do at the end of each game session, which they call a chapter. You should get 1 point automatically, 1 if the player learns something, 1 point for role playing, and 1 point for heroism if you do something really cool. And at the end of the story, you should get some more bonus points as well. So for success, if you were setting out on a specific task, if you went up against a lot of danger, you can get some more points for that. And likewise, if you come up with brilliant, wise strategies and plans, you can get more points for that. And then they give you the experience costs. So this is what it costs to improve something. These vary quite a bit. So a new ability just costs 3, a new discipline is 10, which is quite a bit. A new path like necromancy or thaumaturgy will cost you 7. If you want to increase things that can be increased like virtues, stats, or disciplines, they have hugely varying costs, which is based on your current rating with a multiplier. Caitiff are, by the way, vampires that are not part of a clan, and they have no clan-based discipline, so the cost for them of raising any discipline is always times 6. So increasing a virtue through experience does not increase traits based on that virtue, like humanity, path, or willpower. That's something to know about increasing your virtues. Then we get into the disciplines. So disciplines are the unique vampiric powers, and the origin of them is kind of a mystery. But at some point, vampires figured out that the power of the blood that they ingest could be used to power remarkable abilities. And gradually these became systematized, and they became split amongst the different clans as they focused on different aspects of the undead existence. They note here especially that some powers can be rated at 6 or above, and these are specifically for elders, and these can be abused to really wreck shop in a chronicle. So storytellers should be very cautious if they want to allow 6 dot or more in a discipline. They talk about how to advance disciplines, and then we get into descriptions of each of them and what you can do at each level. Now, there's a huge amount of information here. For example, these pages are just on animalism, rather. And you can see here we get up into 6 dots, 7 dots here at Conquer the Beast, 8, all the way up to 9 dots here. Then we have auspex, which is your sort of supernatural senses. You can get heightened senses, then you can perceive auras. That's interesting as well because you can perceive flaws in somebody's character through their aura, and they have this chart here, which I recommend if somebody has auspex, they should copy this chart and keep it around and use as a storyteller. If you're a storyteller, should keep this around. So you'll know if somebody is a diablerist, somebody who's fed on another vampire, because they'll have black veins in their aura. That can be really useful, and you can use that to potentially manipulate or blackmail that vampire, for example. And then we have how to gather information. At higher levels, you get new abilities like reading minds and telepathy, psychic projection, clairvoyance, prediction, which is like a divination ability, telepathic communication, and your auspex rating allows you to affect different numbers of subjects and much higher ranges. So if you have auspex 9, you can afflict a number of targets equal to 2 times your perception plus your empathy at up to 1,000 miles per point of intelligence. So potentially global reach. And you can see again, we have all the higher level disciplines. In the past, these would be in different books, but V20 has given them all to us right from the start, which is great. Celerity. So this is the ability to move extra quickly. There's a basic system to this. So each point of celerity adds 1 die to every dexterity related dice pool, and you can spend 1 blood point to take an extra action up to the number of dots you have in celerity at the beginning of your relevant turn. This expenditure can go beyond your normal generation maximum. And then, so that means you can really bust up the action economy if you have a bunch of dots in celerity, because you could spend 3 blood points if you have a 3 dot celerity and take 3 actions in a turn and attack 3 times. That could be enough to put somebody down quite easily. Then we have disciplines at a higher level, which are described in more detail, which is cool. Then we got Shimmerstry. This is the illusion capabilities, generally perpetrated by the Ravnos. Again, going way up into 9th level discipline, which is pretty crazy. It allows the Knight to directly alter or create real objects or creatures, but they are of a finite duration. So you can transform the air around a rival kindred into fire or render the locked door insubstantial. So, that's incredible power. Dementation is for the Malkavians, so you're giving madness to another vampire. You can make them feel haunted, give them the Eye of Chaos, the Voice of Madness, or total insanity, and it just gets worse from there. They can have lingering malaise, you can restructure their mind, they can have a lunatic eruption. Dominate is one of the most dreaded of disciplines, they note. This is a vampire's ability to influence another person's thoughts and actions through their own force of will. You have to capture the victim's gaze to use it, so you can only use it against one person at a time, but you basically totally override their ability, and there's rules here for eye contact. You can start with issuing simple commands, you can mesmerize people, you can make them forget things at 3 dots. You can induce conditioning. You can fully possess someone, which is quite interesting. You overwhelm the subject's mind. And you can go even further. You can chain their psyche. You can create obedience. You can mass manipulate a whole group of people. You can speak through the blood, through whole bloodlines of vampires, which is insane. We got fortitude. Again, it has a basic system up to 5. So each dot in fortitude adds to stamina for the purposes of soaking normal damage, both bashing and lethal. You can also use dots in fortitude to soak aggravated damage, but you can't soak things like vampire bites, werewolf claws, magical effects, fire, sunlight, or massive physical damage. So it does have limitations, but it does give you a lot more survivability. And in the higher levels, again, you have some specialized descriptions. Necromancy is both a discipline and a school of blood magic. So this is, again, about extending power over the dead. And so we have a new path connected here, the Sepulchre path, and they can allow you to do things like, witnessing or seeing ghosts, summoning ghosts and souls, compelling ghosts and souls to do things for you. You can bind a summoned ghost to a place to make it haunt something, and you can create torment. You can inflict damage on ghosts and wraiths. Then we have the Ash Path that allows the necromancers to peer into the lands of the dead and affect things there in the Shadowlands. You can speak to the ghosts in the Shadowlands. You can reach across the Shroud and affect ghostly objects. Ex Nihilo allows you to enter the underworld physically. Shroud Mastery gives you the ability to manipulate the veil between the worlds and more directly manipulate the Shroud, which is very cool. cool. Then you have the bone path. So this is about corpses rather than wraiths. This allows you at the basic level to move a cadaver. You can then make a dead body rise with more simple function. You can summon shambling hordes, so you create zombies. You can steal souls, which affects the living and not the dead. You can temporarily turn a living soul into a kind of wraith. So you basically strip the soul out of a person and turn it into a wraith, and their body is empty. Demonic possession lets a vampire insert a soul into a freshly dead body, and the corpse will eventually decay, but it does give either a wraith or a free-floating soul, like a vampire using projection, a temporary home in the physical world, which could be cool. And we have the cenotaph path, which is about forging links between the living worlds and the Shadowlands. Here you have the touch of death. You can feel whether an object has been touched by a ghost or sense the passage of ghosts. Reveal the catene. You can sense the fetters that tie the dead to the physical world. Here you can have extended awareness with 3 dots. You can experience a chill or shiver when stepping into an area where the underworld lies closer to the living one. Death knell, sensitized to the pull that happens whenever a soul escapes from a body to be enslaved by its fetters and tied to this world. So you can sense the creation of a new ghost. And finally, you have the ephemeral binding. So this allows you to transform the subject into a linkage between the living and the dead. And there's the corpse in the monster. This allows the necromantic understanding of the unliving form and allows the user to fully experience the corpse as a gateway between life and death. So the mask of death allows the vampire themselves or to inflict the shape on another vampire of a visage of death. So they look rotted, like they've just come out of a tomb, terrify the crap out of other people. You can have the cold of the grave, so you take on the unfeeling semblance of the dead to protect yourself from physical and emotional harm. You can have the curse of life, inflict some of the undesirable traits of the living upon the undead, removing their corpse-like nature and creating a false life to remind them about the worst things of being alive. So it's a bit kind of mental torture for undead. Gift of the corpse enables a necromancer to ignore most of her race's inherent weaknesses for a short time. By making yourself effectively more of a corpse than a vampire, you lose most of your vulnerability to sunlight, holy artifacts, or frenzy, or stakes, and so on. So it's quite powerful, but it does have a short duration of less than a minute. But that can easily keep you alive in an otherwise deadly situation. Finally, you have the gift of life. So you experience the best and more positive things about being alive. You lose your overwhelming hunger for blood temporarily. You can have sex if you want. You basically have to ensure the death of a mortal due to the enormous amount of vitae you have to spend, but it's, can be worth it for the necromancer to experience that joy of being alive and remind you of your connection to the real world. Then we have the grave's decay path, basically the understanding of the process of decay. So destroying the husk, so you can destroy a human corpse into a pile of dust, which helps if you're hunting, for example. Rigor mortis, so you can push a living or undead body into a state of rigor mortis, which is pretty cool. Wither, which is a little taste of vicissitude, essentially. The vampire can cripple an opponent's limb, whether they're living or undead. The muscle shrivels, the skin peels, bone becomes brittle, etc. And they can't use that limb anymore. You can corrupt the undead flesh, blurring the line between life and undeath. A disease, essentially, that afflicts the target. They get lethargic, dizzy, they lose strength, and they lose the ability to keep blood in their system. Then we have dissolve the flesh, causes the destroy the husk ability to apply to vampires. So it allows the vampire to attempt to turn vampiric flesh to dust or ash, as though the target had been burned or left out in the sun. Then we got the path of the four humors. This is split along 2 axes, hot and cold, and wet and dry. So you've got blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. These are the classic ideas of the 4 humors from way back in the day. So these give you some unique powers. Whispers to the soul, so you can whisper nightmares to a target through day and night. Kiss of the Dark Mother allows you to mix your vitae with black bile, turning it into a noxious poison. Dark humors, you can exude a coat of a particular humor onto your skin, causing all who touch to experience the most intense form of that humor, and then it gives you a description of each of them. Clutching the Shroud, so the necromancer knows how to infuse her own being with the blood of a cold corpse, transform herself into something not wholly vampiric. Instead, they edge closer to being an animated corpse in fact as well as name. She grows distant and chill as though possessed by the spirit of death herself. She has to work to push her attention into the physical world. Then you've got the Black Breath. So you harness the undead black bile that festers at the core of her being, pulls that melancholy to her lungs and lets it mingle with her outgoing breath, and inhales a dark mist, letting it engulf those nearby. Those caught in the black vapors, however, grow despairing and hopeless. How cool is that? Then there's the Vitreous Path. So this allows you to control and influence the energies pertaining to death. It's extremely rare path that manipulates entropy. So you can have the eyes of the dead, see the auras of surrounding beings, and see the energy of death flowing through everyone just as ghosts can. The aura of decay, so you can strengthen the entropy around yourself to the point where it breaks down non-living objects and machines. So things around you will start to decay rapidly. So soul feasting allows the caster to draw on the ambient death energies around her or to actively feed on a ghost, stealing a wraith's substance and mystically transforming that energy into sustenance. That's pretty hardcore. Breath of Thanatos allows the necromancer to draw out entropic energy and focus it upon an area by taking a deep breath and forcefully exhaling a fog of necromantic energy. And this energy cloud is like a beacon for specters that draw them to the flame. So specters are basically wraiths that have given themselves over to the forces of entropy, and they are very dangerous. Then you've got Night Cry. So this is a breath of entropic energy that causes a scream of pure chaos. It pours icy oblivion into a target or group of targets, either sweeping away the inherent entropy or collecting that destruction and unleashing it. And then we have necromantic rituals. So these are extended tasks, basically. So you'll need to perform these over a period of time. And we have, different level 1 rituals, which are relatively straightforward. And the casting times vary widely, so you have to look at the descriptions for those. I won't go through all of these because it's more fun to discover them. And we've got level 2 rituals. You can create some cool tools and stuff. These rituals are generally for more lasting effects. So they can create special signs, items, or talismans or whatever, or have a lasting effect on a specific target. And we've got level 4 rituals, level 5, like Chill of Oblivion, which takes 12 hours. An individual affected by this treats aggravated damage from fire and high temperatures as if it were lethal damage. You can attempt to extinguish any fire by rolling willpower. This Chill of Oblivion can make you very resistant to fire for a period of time. Then we've got Obfuscate, so we're back to more normal disciplines here. It was a lot of necromancy. This is about cloaking yourself in the shadows, and it's extremely useful, this skill, to hide from combat or hide from people who might be looking for you for all the terrible things you've done to them. Obtenerbration is the signature power of the Sombra, as it mentions here. This is about controlling shadows. You can play with shadows with just a dot. You can shape darkness, make shadows where nothing is there to cast them. Shroud of Night basically can completely obscure things around you, and you can move the cloud of darkness around you as well, but you need concentration for that. At level 3, you can create prehensile shadow tentacles that can grasp and constrict foes, become one with the shadow with 4 dots, and basically you become a monstrous hybrid of matter and shadow, which has big benefits because it's hard to hit a shadow. Tenebrous Form is taking that one step further, so you actually physically become an inky amoeboid patch of shadow. You're practically invulnerable and may slither through cracks and crevices. In addition, the shadow vampire gains the ability to see in natural darkness. How cool is that? And then again, we have some even crazier stuff at the higher levels. Then we have Potence. Again, this has a normal system up to level 5, so each dot will give you 1 die to all strength-related dice pools. You can also spend 1 blunt point and change your Potence dice into an equal number of automatic successes to all strength-related rolls for the turn. It also can be applied to the damage roll results. Then in Potent 6+, you have some specific crazy abilities. Presence is the discipline of emotional manipulation, so you might create passion or terror in mortals and kindred alike. So at the first level, you can create awe. People are in awe of you. You can have a dread gaze to frighten the hell out of somebody. You can entrance someone into becoming your servant. Summon is an interesting one because you can call to yourself any person that you've ever met, mortal or supernatural, and it can go any distance within the physical world. The subject of the summons will come as fast as they can, possibly without even knowing why. They'll know intuitively how to find you, the summoner. That's very cool. Then we have Majesty. So this allows you to make yourself look so formidable and majestic. People will find you irresistible, terrifying, everything all at once. Beyond that, we have Love, Paralyzing Glances, Spark of Rage, even more manipulation of emotion. Protean is allowing the kindred the ability to manipulate your physical form. Transform kindred can generally use other disciplines as well. So even if you transform into a wolf, you can read auras or whatever. But there may be some combos where that doesn't work, and the storyteller has to kind of keep an eye out for that. So at the beginning, it's just a few little things. You get the Eyes of the Beast, then you get some Feral Claws for additional damage. Earth Meld, so you can become one with the earth, sinking into the ground, and then you can't move around within it, but basically you get full protection from daylight. So if you're trapped outdoors, you can just go whoop into the ground and hide there until it's safe again. Likewise, if somebody's chasing you. Now, 4 dots is where it becomes really cool, and you can transform into a beast. So you will pick a particular shape, and you can change into a wolf or a bat. And basically, you're far superior to normal animals because you keep your own psyche and temperament, but you can still call upon the abilities of that beast form. The wolf, you get better senses, and for the bat, you can fly. 5 dots, you get mist form, which allows you to dissolve into mist. You can float around and slip under doors, through screens, down pipes, and through any tiny openings. But even hurricane force winds cannot disperse your mist shape. So it's an incredibly cool power and very, very useful. And then that's, kind of up to the normal level. And then we get our crazy elder disciplines above that. Quietus is Clan Assamite's signature power. This discipline is about assassination and silent death. So the first dot basically imbues the vampire with a mystical silence radiating from your body, so you can kill people quietly. Scorpion's Touch allows you to create powerful venom that strips prey of their resilience. Dagon's Call causes a vampire to drown in their own blood. Baal's Caress allows the kindred to transmute her blood into a virulent ichor that destroys any living or undead flesh it touches. Ouch. Finally got Taste of Death, so you can spit caustic blood at your target, burns flesh, and corrodes bones. Yikes. And then, of course, Elder Disciplines beyond that get even more gross. We got Serpentis. So this is the discipline of the Setites, the followers of Set. You got the Eyes of the Serpent. It gives you the hypnotic gaze of the serpent. Then you can get the Tongue of the Asp. Causes aggravated wounds when you lash people with it. The Skin of the Adder. So you get scaly hide. You get more supple and flexible. Then you can change into a huge black cobra at 4 dots, which is awesome. And the Heart of Darkness. Pull your heart from your body or use this ability on other Canaanites using gruesome surgery. So upon removing your heart, you can hide it, and then you can't be staked. And then we have even more cool stuff beyond that. So a very interesting one there. Now we got Thaumaturgy, Blood Magic, and there's a lot of paths here again. So we'll go through these quickly. We've got the Path of Blood. It's usually the primary path. Basically, by touching the blood of your subject, you can determine how much vitae remains in the subject, and if the subject is a vampire, how recently they fed, their approximate generation, and with 3 or more successes, whether they've ever committed diablerie, the slaughter of another vampire. Blood Rage allows a vampire to force another kindred to expend blood against their will, which is awesome. Blood of Potency, you gain control over your own blood so that you may effectively concentrate it, making it more powerful for a short time. So effectively, you lower your generation temporarily, but only once per night. How cool is that? Theft of Vitae, you can siphon Vitae from another kindred. The blood streams out in a physical torrent from the subject to the kindred. Then you got the Elemental Mastery path, so you can draw upon control over and communion with inanimate objects. It can only be used to affect the unliving, but you can have elemental strength to increase your physical power. You can speak with the spirits of inanimate objects with wooden tongues. You can animate the unmoving, so animate unliving objects. You can take an elemental form of relatively similar mass to your own. Then finally, you can summon an elemental, very useful in a combat situation. Then you got the Green Path, which is all about manipulating plant matter. So Herbal Wisdom, you communicate with the spirit of a plant. Cryptic but rewarding, it says these conversations can be. You can speed the seasons passing to accelerate a plant's growth, or speed a plant's death and decay. The Dance of Vines, so you can use vegetation to trap or move along surfaces or people. You've got Verdant Haven, so you can weave a temporary shelter out of a sufficient amount of plant matter. And you can awaken the forest giants, so you can animate entire trees, give them the gift of movements. They pull up their roots from the soil and shake the ground with their steps. We've got the Hands of Destruction path, which is usually used within the Sabbat, and so this gives you control over decay with the first dot. You accelerate the decrepitude of your target. You can gnarl and bend wooden objects at 2 dots. You have a Bilious Acidic Touch at 3 dots, which causes horrendous chemical burns to living tissue. You can atrophy a victim's limb, leaving a desiccated, almost mummified husk of bone and skin. The effects are instantaneous, and in mortals, they're also irreversible. Yikes. Then we have Turn to Dust, which accelerates decrepitude in its victims. Mortals age at the mere touch, gaining decades in moments. We got the Lure of Flames, which is about control over mystical flames. It's a quite simple system here. It doesn't need too much expansion into multiple sub-disciplines like the others. Neptune's Might. This is relatively rare, so this is about the manipulation of water. Eyes of the Sea. You can peer into a body of water and view events events that have transpired on, in, or around it from the water's perspective. You can construct a prison of water to animate and imprison a subject. You can use blood to water, so you can turn blood into water to weaken vampires and killing mortals in moments, and create a flowing wall, form an impassable barrier. Finally, you can dehydrate living and unliving targets by removing the water from their body, leaving behind hideous mummified corpses. You can also use it to dry out other things, like clothes. Movement of the mind is about telekinesis. Again, there's a system here, so the more dots you have, the more you can move, up to 1,000 pounds or 500 kilos. Path of conjuring allows you to summon objects. So at the first dot, you can summon simple inanimate objects. At the second dot, you can make them permanent without spending willpower. With the third dot, you can conjure complex objects with multiple components and moving parts, so like guns or chainsaws or cell phones. Reverse conjuration allows you to banish into existence any object previously called forth. Power over life, so you can create impressive simulacra of creatures. They have no free will and they just follow your instructions completely. They can be possessed as well. The path of corruption, primarily a mentally and spiritually oriented path centered on influencing the psyches of other individuals. You use contradict to interrupt the subject's thought process, forcing them to reverse their current course of action. It's very useful. You can subvert, so it's a longer lasting kind of version of contradiction. So victims act on their own suppressed temptations, pursuing agendas that their morals or self-control would forbid them to follow under normal circumstances. And depending on your successes, the subversion will last longer. Dissociate is very cool, so it basically breaks the social ties of interpersonal relationships. So even the most passionate affair or oldest friendship can be cooled through the use of dissociate, and weaker personal ties can be destroyed forever. So you have to touch your target. The more successes you get, you'll lose a certain number of dice from your social rolls for a length of time. Then you have addiction, so you expose the target to a particular sensation, substance, or action, and then they become powerfully psychologically dependent on it. And then you have dependence. This allows the vampire to tie her victim's soul to her own. The victim then has lethargy and helplessness when the victim is not in the presence of the vampire or acting to further their desires. So that's really powerful influence over somebody else. Got the path of Mars. So this is about Mars as in the god of war, not the planet. So War Cry allows you to become less susceptible to battle fear or the powers of the undead. Strike True gives you a single attack that strikes its foe without having to roll. Wind Dance invokes the power of the wind, moving the vampire out of range of their enemy's blows really quickly. You have Fearless Heart, so it augments your ability as a warrior and makes you a potent fighting force. And then you have Comrades at Arms, allows any of the earlier effects to be applied to a group, such as a pack or a war party. Then we have the newest path, the path of Technomancy. So this is about using thaumaturgy on modern devices. So Analyze, this allows you to touch a device and understand how the basics of that technology works. You can project your perceptions into a device, giving it a temporary understanding of its purpose, how it functions, and its means of operation. Burnout, 2 dots, pretty useful. So sensitive electronics, you can just burn out their power supply by making the power supply surge. You can't use it against individuals, although if you use it for like a car's control chip or something, then you could potentially cause a lot of damage. Encrypt Decrypt, so this allows you to scramble a device's controls, making it inaccessible. You can also decrypt something that has been encrypted, which is very, very useful. And some neonates have taken to calling this power DRM. I like that touch. Remote Access, so this allows you to operate a device without being anywhere near it. So it's not a form of telekinesis. You basically touch the object directly with the power of the mind. Then you have Telecommute, so this is a derivation of remote access. It allows you to project your consciousness into the internet, sending your mind through a network connection as fast as it physically can go, which is the speed of light, basically, if it's fiber optics. While immersed in the network, you can use any other technomancy power on the devices with which you make contact. So that's crazy. You could jump your mind into a cell phone and cause all kinds of crazy shit to happen throughout the cell phone network before you jump back out again. Then you have the Path of the Father's Vengeance, Thaumaturge's interpretations of the Book of Nod, which is a sort of religious book about the Cainite origins of the vampires. So these powers apply to vampires only. They don't affect anyone else, and they include things like Zilla's Litany. This power reveals existing blood bonds and vinculi to the thaumaturge. You have the Crone's Pride, inflicts the curse of the crone. You basically make somebody hideously ugly, reducing their appearance to 0 like a Nosferatu. Feast of Ashes removes a vampire's dependency on blood temporarily. Basically, you have to consume literal ashes, but you get little sustenance from them. Uriel's Disfavor invokes the darkness of the Angel of Death. All but the dimmest of light causes the subject excruciating pain. Even some forms of bright artificial light can damage the vampire. So that's really bad. for the typical vampire. And then Valediction levies a punishment for breaking one of Cain's greatest commandments, the ban against diablerie. So this can be very bad for the Sabbat to do a lot of this kind of thing. And when this power takes effect, you immediately revert to your original generation. So any generation that you've gained by feeding on higher generation vampires is immediately gone. So Sabbat very much fear this power. Then there is a lesser-known thaumaturgical counter magic path. This basically allows you to countermand a certain amount of blood magic by, an equivalent number of dice from your number of dots in that path. Then we have command over the weather, which again has a system associated with it. The more dots you have, the more lethal and crazy stuff you can do. So you start with fog, light breeze, minor temperature changes. Then you can command rain or snow. Then you get high winds or moderate temperature change. At 4 dots, you can get a storm. At 5 dice, you can do a lightning strike for 10 dice of lethal damage, which is pretty hardcore. Then we have lots of rituals for the thaumaturge as well. A lot of these are very cool, and some of them are super creepy, so I won't read through all of them. Like the necromancy rituals, they go level 1 to 5. Each level gets more powerful than the last, but requires more preparation, and often more, not just time, but also material components, which could be really hard to get. You might need things connected to your target, or very specific kinds of additional tools for your ritual. So we got level 4 all the way up to level 5. Vicissitude, this is the body crafting, flesh crafting that the Zemiche do. You start with malleable visage, so you can alter your own bodily parameters. Spend a blood point for each body part to be changed. Fleshcraft is similar, but it allows you to do drastic and grotesque alterations on other creatures, but only flesh may be transformed, not bone. 3 dots, however, you get bonecraft, so you can manipulate bone in the same way you can manipulate flesh, so you can completely deform someone beyond recognition at this level, which is gross. And you get really creative with this in the game. Then you have horrid form. You can use this power to become hideous and deadly monsters. You increase to a full 8 feet, 2.5 meters. Your skin becomes sickly greenish gray or grayish black chitin. The arms become ape-like and ropey with ragged black nails, and the face warps into something out of a nightmare. A row of spines sprouts from the vertebrae, and the external carapace exudes a foul-smelling grease. Nasty. At 5 dots, you get blood form, which is awesome. So you physically transform all or part of your body into sentient vitae. It's identical to the vampire's normal vitae. You can use it to nourish herself or others, create ghouls, or establish blood bonds. Makes you invulnerable to being staked, cut, bludgeoned, or pierced, but you can still be burned or exposed to the sun. So like the transformation to mist or transformation to shadow, transforming into blood is a great way to avoid damage and get yourself out of dodge. And then we have our elder level powers, which I'll leave for you to discover. Now we have the actual rules, page 245. The book goes in a weird order, what can I tell you? But yeah, the rules, essentially, as I've said, you roll all 10-sided dice pools. There are different types of actions which they outline for you. Your ratings in a trait will go from 0 to 5, from abysmal to superb, and you'll build a dice pool. So you almost never simply roll just what you have in an attribute. You'll add those dice to the dice gained from some ability. You might only roll an attribute if you're doing something that's just about strength, for example. Well, humanity contest for moral degradation will just be the humanity trait. They talk about how to do multiple actions. You can divide your dice pools between multiple actions. If you have celerity, however, you don't have to subtract from your dice pools to do multiple actions, which is a huge benefit of that power. They talk about difficulties. So there are kind of 2 axes of difficulty. The difficulty is essentially the number you need to roll on a die to gain a success. So they give an example. If your difficulty is 6, you roll 3, 3, 8, 7, and 8, and 10, then you score 3 successes. And the more successes you get, the better you do. So you have your difficulty, and then you have your degrees of success. So 1 success is marginal, 2 successes is moderate, 3 is a complete success, 4 is an exceptional success, 5 or more is a phenomenal success. This was trimmed down in Chronicles of Darkness. Anything above 8 is a success, and then you just are thinking about numbers of successes, and there's the addition of complications in the story path system that runs Curseborn, for example. So the storyteller system, as outlined here, has had a number of permutations as it's evolved over the years, but that's the basics. Botch is if none of your dice come up with success and 1 or more dice are 1s, then you've botched, and that's when something really bad happens. You can also have automatic successes. If you're doing something you're good at and there's no pressure, then just do it. It's no big deal. You can also have complications. If a task takes a long amount of time, you'll need to do an extended action. You'll roll your dice over and over again at subsequent intervals, and you try to collect enough successes to succeed in the given amount of rolls that you have. You can also have resisted actions. So that's where you're rolling a dice pool against someone else. And there's teamwork actions as well. So characters can work together to collect successes. So 2 or more characters make rolls separately and then add their successes together. So they don't combine their traits into 1 dice pool. They roll separately using their own characters' appropriate dice pools. Then they talk about, how to use the dice system. Different kinds of actions are summarized on the table here, from simple, extended, resisted to extended and resisted. And then the usage of time. So you have turns, scenes, and chapters. So a turn is, anywhere from 3 seconds to 3 minutes, depending on the pace of a given scene. The scene is a particular chunk of time where something important happens, like a combat scene or a manipulation or a conversation at a party or something. And a chapter is a game session, essentially. A story should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. A chronicle will be a series of stories that are connected into like a campaign. And then downtime is trivial or tedious things can be done during downtime, and you can kind of skip over them. Then they give you some examples of roles, which is really helpful. So it gives you some ideas of like, what should you roll if you want to know what kind of alarm system a place has, or whose story will the prince believe, or how long can you remain motionless in the bushes until the guards move out of your way, that kind of thing. They give you example dice pools and difficulties for these kind of tasks. Then we have systems and drama. So we have automatic feats that require taking an action but don't require a dice pool. So using blood for healing, augmenting attributes, etc. Rising from the ground, it spends a turn but doesn't need a roll. Movement doesn't require rolls. Readying a weapon, so drawing a weapon or reloading a gun. It takes no roll in most cases as long as you don't take any other action in a turn. Starting a car or yielding. So if you basically allow the person behind you in initiative to act first, it doesn't cost you anything. Physical feats. So they give you examples of systems for specific actions using different attributes like climbing, driving, hunting. So hunting is pretty important. A varying dice pool depending on where you're hunting, and you'll get bonuses from having a herd, stuff like that. There's jumping, lifting things, breaking things, opening, closing things, being in pursuits and chases, sneaking around, shadowing somebody, swimming, throwing. Then mental feats would be things like, awakening actually can require a roll. Creating something can require effort, so you need to roll for that. Computer use, which has a lot of different possibilities here. Investigation, repairing, researching, tracking. Social feats include things like carousing, so relaxing, having a good time. Giving yourself the appearance of credibility. Fast talking somebody, so baffling somebody with nonsense, essentially. Interrogation, so asking questions of people, perhaps forcefully. Intimidation, so intimidating someone into getting what you want. Oration, so using rhetoric to get people to listen to you. Performance value, and seduction, which could have a few different types of roles. And spending willpower, so there's a lot of different ways to do that, and they outline those here, and then how you regain willpower. Whenever you fulfill a goal or restore some self-confidence, you get some willpower restoration, and at the end of a given story, not session, you will get all your willpower back fully. You gain one willpower point each night when you first rise, and if you behave in a way that fulfills your nature rather than your demeanor, then you can also gain willpower. Then we have using blood pool. You can use it to heal damage. You can use it to increase your attributes by 1 dot for a scene. You can give your blood points to another kindred, allowing them to use the blood. You can gift a mortal animal with a dose of vitae, allowing them to inject or ingest it. If they keep that in their system, they become a ghoul, like your servant, basically. And then you can give yourself the blush of life. You can only do that if you're on the path of humanity. If you're a vampire on a different path, you've given up on that, essentially. Then they tell you how to earn your blood pool, how many blood points you get per turn of suckling on someone. Kindred can resist kiss very pleasurable, but they can resist it more readily than mortals can. Then you have the blood pool maxes and blood points per turn for different generations, going up to ridiculous values for like early generations. And the amount of blood you can get from different vessels. So from vampires, werewolves, humans, children, cows, dogs, cats, bag of plasma, all that kind of stuff. Then we have combat. So this is where some people find the system a bit clumsy because a typical combat roll will take several different stages, and there's different types of damage as well. So you have bashing, lethal, and aggravated, and they overlap and develop on each other in an interesting way. And there's a useful chart here that breaks it down pretty simply. So you roll initiative or add 6 to the initiative rating. Everyone declares their actions. The highest initiative goes first, and then you go in order after that. Any multiple actions are declared, and you reduce your dice pools accordingly unless you spend celerity. You declare your discipline activations and spend any willpower at that point. Stage 2 is when you attack. So for unarmed close combat, you roll dexterity plus brawl. For armed close combat, you roll dexterity plus melee. For ranged combat, dexterity plus firearms, guns, or dexterity plus athletics for thrown weapons. And a character can abort to a defensive action, block, dodge, or parry at any time before the action as long as you make a successful willpower roll or spend a willpower point. At stage 3, you will determine the total damage from your weapon type or maneuver, adding any extra dice gained from successes on the attack roll, and then targets may attempt to soak. So basically, you're going to roll initiative, and then you're going to roll for powers or potentially disciplines. Then you're going to roll for your combat. Then you're going to roll for your damage, and then targets are going to roll for soak to see if they absorb some of that damage. So there's a lot of rolling of dice pools in combat. Again, that was streamlined in Vampire the Requiem and other later games. I personally don't find it a big bother. I like having that a little bit of extra crunchiness, a little bit more ways to differentiate different types of fighting styles from each other and different types of defenses and so on. So there's also different kinds of combat maneuvers you can do, like aborting actions, setting up an ambush, fighting blind, flanking attack or rear attacking somebody, targeting multiple action penalties, blocking, so you can't block lethal or aggravated attacks, but you can block bashing attacks, dodging, so you try to get out of the way to avoid melee or brawl attacks. If it's a gunfight, you try to move a bit and end up behind cover or drop to the ground. Then you'll get some cover, basically, even if you're just remaining prone. If you parry, then you can block a brawl or melee attack, but you have to block with a weapon that normally causes lethal damage, and the attacker could actually be hurt if you parry successfully. You got close combat maneuvers, you can bite, of course, you can claw, you can clinch, which is a grapple, you can disarm somebody, you can hold them, kick them, you can fight multiple opponents, you can strike with a fist or a foot, you can sweep, you can tackle them to the ground, you can have longer weapons, which deal damage over a longer distance, you can attack with a weapon, and that gives you, your traits, accuracy, difficulties, type of damage, and effects that you get from those. And range combat maneuvers, you can take the aim action to gain bonuses to your future attacks. You do automatic fire if your weapon is capable. You can take cover, so that helps protect you, and cover type will add to the difficulty. So if only your head is exposed, for example, you get a +3, it's added to your opponent's difficulty to hit you. You can fire multiple times, like maybe a double-barreled shotgun, and these have their own rules rather than the rules for automatic fire and 3-round burst. Reloading just takes a turn, we don't have to roll anything. Strafing, you can fire automatic weapons across an area, so you can fire against more than one target, and you divide the successes on the attack roll evenly among all targets in the covered area. 3-round burst, you gain 2 additional dice on a single attack roll and expend 3 shots, but only certain weapons can do this. Firing 2 weapons is considered a multiple action, complete with dividing the dice of the lowest pool between 2 different targets. You can have maneuver complications, so things that make it harder for you, being blinded, dazed, if you're basically stunned, you can be immobilized, you can be knocked down, and you have to make rolls to get back up if you're trying to still do something. I have a nice summary table here of your different maneuvers for close combat and range combat. Armor chart here, which adds its rating to the character's soak dice pool against different damage, but it doesn't protect you against fire or sunlight for vampires. Then you have your melee weapons chart, your basic weapons, their damage, and whether they can be concealed or not. And we have, the stake through the heart is another maneuver. We have a range weapon chart with some example firearms, their damage, range, rate of fire, their magazine capacity, and then we have their level of concealability again. So, by the way, P means can be carried in a pocket, J is jacket, T is a trench coat, N can't be concealed at all, it's too big. So, for example, an assault rifle can't conceal that. A pistol can be held in a pocket. Big, heavy revolver could be in a jacket, but not just in a regular pocket. Then you have your health. So you got your typical health chart. Incapacitated is where it's immediately before you enter torpor. Torpor is a death-like sleep common to the undead, particularly ancient vampires. So once you're in torpor, you remain dormant. And if you have 0 blood points, then you begin to lose health levels each time you want to spend blood. If you fall below incapacitated in this faction, you enter torpor automatically. You'll stay this way until somebody gives you a blood point, which will allow you to rise, regardless of your humanity or path rating. And your humanity or path rating tells you how long your torpor will be. So if you're really close to human at 10, it'll only be 1 day. If it's 0, it could be a millennium or more. And after that period of rest, you can spend a blood point and make an awakening roll to rise from torpor. Final death, if you're incapacitated or in torpor and take 1 more level of aggravated damage, you immediately die. But that's aggravated damage, remember. So you can also be sent to final death through massive amounts of bashing or lethal trauma, but it must be enough to destroy or dismember the corpse beyond repair. They talk about applying damage, which, as I mentioned before, you put in sort of a slash for bashing, and as you fill up with bashing, you'll eventually go back and change them into lethal, and then they'll eventually become aggravated. It's an interesting damage system in the game, and I find it really much more interesting and exciting than what you would find with hit points. Then they give you mortal healing times and how to heal lethal damage, how long that will take. Then you have states of being. So these are talking about blood bonds. These are ways that you can enslave basically another being by giving them 3 drinks of your blood. It's mostly used to ensnare mortals and make ghouls, but you can also bind other kindred to yourself. Blood bond is an essential strategy in the jihad. So, like, if you hold another kindred in your thrall through the blood bond, that can give you a huge amount of additional power, both politically and in terms of actual power in the blood. Then you've got vinculum ratings. So Volderies, this is like a blood bond, but it's basically something that Sabbat do. So they bond themselves to the pack instead of an individual, and thus to the Sabbat's greater cause. The strength of this tie is called a vinculum, or blood tie, and so you have different ratings with different effects. So if you have a rating of 10 in a vinculum with an individual, you readily give your life or take somebody else's for the individual. At 1, you don't care about this person on a vinculum level, although you may on a personal level. It was interesting that the blood bonds in Volderi vinculum, another difference between the Sabbat and the Camarilla. Then we got the derangements. So these are examples of derangements you can suffer for various reasons, particularly from Malkavians using dementation. You can give them bipolar disorder, and they have rules for all this: bulimia, fugue states, hysteria, megalomania, multiple personality disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, paranoia, sanguinary animism, which is unique to the kindred. Kindred with this derangement believe that they do not merely consume victims' blood, but their souls as well, which are then made a part of the victim's consciousness, and then they start to hear voices after feeding. Schizophrenia, deterioration. So this is a vampire who was staked or otherwise paralyzed. They keep decaying because they can't get more blood, so they start to lose blood pool and eventually start consuming excess moisture and eventually go into torpor or die. Diablerie, so this is draining all the blood from a kindred victim. According to kindred legend, the very soul is withdrawn from the victim's body and taken into the diablerist. For the vampiric soul is a greedy thing and clings tenaciously to unlife, so it's a pretty hard thing to do, actually. On completion of the diablerie, the diablerist is overwhelmed by euphoria, and a self-control instincts roll is necessary, difficulty 10 minus the character's humanity, to avoid losing control. It's an incredibly powerful sensation. The true benefit is when you feed on a lower generation vampire, so you steal the power and potency of the victim's own blood and permanently lower your own generation by 1. So that means a larger blood pool, the ability to dominate more kindred, the ability to increase traits above 5, all kinds of cool stuff can become available. But the problem with Diablerie is that it is forbidden by the Camarilla and frowned upon by many others, and of course it's visible in your aura if you have committed it, so you'll need to hide that. One of the advantages of being a walking corpse is that you don't have to worry about disease, but there are potential problems for vampires with bloodborne diseases. Electrical damage, so they're not nearly so affected by simple electricity as are mortals, but it still can prove a danger. Faith, so most mortals lack the ability to affect the kindred with faith alone. However, certain mortals with the true faith trait can use their devotion as a defense or a weapon against vampires. Falling damage can still afflict vampires. Fire is a big problem for vampires that can end their existence, in fact. Frenzy and Rotrek, basically this is when the beast kind of overrules you. A character literally and usually unwillingly gives in to the darker instincts of the vampiric nature. The character is consumed with rage or hunger, unable or unwilling to consider the effects of any action. So friends, foes, lovers, ethics, none of these matter to a vampire in frenzy. So in the Camarilla, this is seen as a humiliating loss of control. A Sabbat kindred typically seek not to prevent frenzy, but to control it and use it to their advantage. Then there's some systems for that, so different things can provoke you into a frenzy with different amounts of difficulty. Characters in frenzy and how you roleplay them. Then you have Rotrek, which is the red fear. Sunlight and fire can bring about a terrified fight or flight mentality, and this causes the vampire to flee in blind panic from the source of their fear, lashing out at anything in their way. Relatively innocuous stimuli are unlikely to induce this, so for example, a lit cigarette won't cause it, but if a fireplace suddenly flares up, it could cause Rotrek, the red fear. Then you have Golconda, another means of salvation. So this is the idea that vampires can still be saved somehow. Basically, it's left as a mystery. Essentially, nobody knows if it's really true, because if vampires have reached Golconda, then they wouldn't be around to talk about it. Some tales speak of becoming mortal again. I think this actually was a thing in the first edition of Vampire, and then it stopped being a thing. Poisons and drugs can still affect the vampire because they will go into the blood of the victim that they've consumed. So much like, if you've ever seen What We Do in the Shadows, if you drink the blood of a drunk person or a drugged person, you will suffer the effects of whatever was in their bloodstream at the time. So yeah, if you want to have a vampire rave, go to a real rave and suck the blood of the people on drugs. And they give you different outcomes for different kinds of drugs. And the effect of sunlight, which is extremely dangerous, and temperature extreme, which is also extremely dangerous. Sunlight, just don't even mess with it. You just can't. Rotrek is an innate way to protect you from that. Then we got nice examples of play here with quite a bit of action. Then we got morality systems. So this is where we get into humanity, which is rated on a 1 to 10 scale, as we know before. So humanity determines how human you appear. It affects your virtues. It affects your basically your ability to rise and act during the day. If you drop to 0, then you basically are no longer playable. You're just completely controlled by the beast, and you hand your character sheet to the storyteller. And then they describe what happens at different levels of humanity, which they call the hierarchy of sin. Of course, we have alternate paths and paths of enlightenment, and these are exclusive. So if you switch from the path of humanity, then you permanently go to something else. And we have the descriptions of different virtues here. This is the path of enlightenment. So they have conviction, instinct, and you can create path followers, and you can switch from humanity to a different path if you want to. There's a path of blood, nicknamed the dervishes. So they believe that mortals are beneath the notice of vampires, feed from them only when necessary, lose no opportunity to obtain kindred blood of any generation. The power of the blood shall ensure the clan's victory. Withstand the beast's fury, failing to master oneself results in lessened prowess. Almost exclusively clan Assamite vampires practice this path. Then they have their own hierarchy of sin, which is very much opposed to the humanity hierarchy of sin. The path of the bones, so-called the grave diggers, the followers, believed to grown out of a warped code upheld by the morbid vampires who sired the Giovanni. Basically, they study death and all its permutations. They want to search for a purpose for death and the life that prefaces it, quantify the different types of death, and hasten death's arrival should it seem to be unnaturally delayed. So if you're a necromancer, you may fall onto the path of bones and need to think about this hierarchy of sin. We have the path of Cain. This is for the Naudists. So this is the vampiric religion, essentially. This is about being an exemplification of the vampiric nature. So for here in this path, you want to learn from the history of Cain, develop your willpower and predatory instinct, take the vitae of the unworthy, so you can become closer to Cain, adapt to the needs of your new condition, and study your abilities. And then you have your own hierarchy of sins here. Path of Cathari, the Catharist heresy of the Middle Ages, a dualistic philosophy holding that the world was created in equal parts by a good creator, responsible for virtue and spirit, and an evil creator who fashioned the material world and its vices. So the ethics of this path are about indulging in vice, leading others to temptation, grant the curse of Cain to those with a lot of passion. The entire material world is corrupt, so expect betrayal and wickedness and do so in return. Your fate as a creature of evil is predestined, so accept it, fulfill your purpose. Death leads to reincarnation. Mortals return after you kill them, but you should avoid eternal death because you'll return as a mortal again if you die. And again, they have their own hierarchy of sins. And then we have the path of the feral heart, followed by the beasts that they're called. This is about embracing the fact that you have the beast and that you're the ultimate hunter. So the ethics here are about survival. Politics and technology just get in the way. So try to strike a balance with your beast and your inner brutality. The natural world is an illusion, and all things must live according to their forms. Your form as the ultimate predator is the form you're meant to be in. And although fire can kill you, you must master your fears so you can kill those who would use it against you. And you must have absolute loyalty, whether you're running alone or with a pack. You have no time for shifting allegiances. It's quite interesting. And they have their hierarchy of sins as well. Path of Honorable Accord, they're called the Knights. They're kind of the opposite. They're looking to avoid corruption, so they're about always keeping your word, honor your agreements, never show cowardice or your fears. Duty comes before personal matters. Treat your equals and betters fairly and equitably. The dishonorable are beneath your contempt, however. Always repay your debts, and support your comrades at arms in all things, except where they counsel treachery. So, very honorable people, the Knights. And they have, of course, the path of Honorable Accord, hierarchy of sins. And you have the path of Lilith, which is considered heretical by most Cainites of the Sabbat. So this is an elaborate history and an alternate tale of creation itself, which we won't get into. But the ethics are about only through pain are we elevated. Be teacher, torturer, and lover to any who seek enlightenment. Practice what you learn. Wisdom is meaningless unless it has action along with it. Cultivate a garden that you may show the power of your own creation. Seek out on those on the border of awareness and initiate them. And finally, gather with your brothers and sisters to share your learning and anguish. There you go. It's the path of Lilith, the path of metamorphosis. So you want to work to become something beyond human. Learn the characteristics of all stages of life and death. Don't concern yourself overly with mortals. They're a step below the kindred, not above them. Don't share your knowledge with others. It's too valuable to trust to flawed creatures. Indulge the beast and deny it. True comprehension of unlife requires a broad range of experience. Alter and augment one's body. Changing the flesh may pave the way towards changing the soul. Do not heed the needs or desires of others. So this is the Zemitche path, essentially. Then we have the path of night, the nihilists. So they wholly accept their damnation, and they borrow heavily from Catholic dogma. So their ethics, they leave no being untouched by your vampiric taint. Tempt and horrify those around you. Inspire others to accept their inner darkness. Experience every sensation imaginable. Death is a means, not an end, obviously, for the kindred. Kindred as souls damned by God fulfill their purpose by preying upon mortals. So they see themselves as part of God's grand design. We have the Path of Paradox. They're nicknamed the Shilmulo, a Romani word for vampire. Embrace only if absolutely necessary, and then only from your family line. Interpret the svadharma of others and aid them in their fulfillment of it. This is kind of a version of Hinduism or Buddhism, kind of. And every individual in this path has their purpose or svadharma, according to the path. And that's what this is here. Destroy other kindred, for they're unnatural to Maya. So erase karmic debt, dispel Maya's illusions, and return to the samsara. Use deception to achieve your ends, and confuse the antediluvians by returning their childhood to the cycle. Rather unusual set of beliefs, one popular with the Ravenos. We have the Path of Power and the Inner Voice, the Unifiers. Here, the ethics are about not tolerating failure. Be sporadic in your rewards, strive for control, and dominate the world around you. Use the most effective tool for any undertaking. Hate, fear, and anger are key, but feign benevolence. Show respect to those in authority, but replace them when they falter. And deal from a position of power, do not show weakness. Popular path for the La Sombra. Then you have the Path of Typhon, typically for the followers of Set, and it's a truly sinister path, according to the book. So the ethics are about gathering information, secret or otherwise, and learn how it applies to the resurrection of Set. Contribute to the clan's greater goal of reviving its slumbering master. Bring others under your sway. Subjugate the beasts. Maintain a veil of secrecy, and look for Set's hidden signs and act upon them. There you go. You have their own hierarchy of sins, of course. Another very excellent gothic, moody portrait there. And now we get into the storyteller section. I'm not going to spend much time on this here, but this is just about getting the mood right, what the world of darkness should feel like, how to outline and develop stories for vampires and what the chronicles should be like. They give you some possible sort of frameworks for chronicles, which is really helpful. Working out roles within your chronicle for different characters. Building a prelude for characters can be helpful. So the moment a character is embraced should be role-played, and this moment, more than anything else, can define how he will be changed by existence of vampire. So you want to play up the sensation of being watched and then being caught, and then all the things that happen when you go through the process of being embraced and then arising again as a vampire. And here's some interesting questions you can ask to help the character build on their backstory. There's some different ways here suggested on how to bring together your coterie of players, how and why they might come together, and creating stories, introducing conflict, creating appropriate setting and mood, how to divide your stories into scenes over the course of a night, and how to characterize your scenes and your storyteller characters, which is very handy. There's some nice 10 pieces of storytelling advice, so some do's and don'ts basically, and then some more general tips and techniques like using downtime, cutscenes, flashbacks, dream sequences, telling stories in parallel, hunting scenes. They mention here that these scenes can be tedious or awkward or boring for other players, and that's one of the issues I have with V5, is that hunting becomes this whole thing, and it can really turn a chronicle inward on itself, and I just don't find it enjoyable. But here you just do a simple hunting roll and get on with it. Through the one roll method, you can do a 3-stage hunt, you can do flashes of life to give the sort of sense of moral consequences, and narrative scenes, the impact of hunger, and how to roleplay that. And now we have the others, so these are the antagonists, and for spoiler reasons, we'll just have a quick peek at these. Got Inquisitors, Hunters, the US government, and their agencies. We've got scholars, criminals and their bosses, werewolves, who are a real bad problem, mages, witches, shamans, techno freaks, cultists, high wizards. We've got fairies and changelings, the restless dead, the wraiths and ghosts. We have demons of all different types, normal everyday beasts. That shouldn't be too big a problem, but a bear is still going to be pretty dangerous. A small dog, maybe not so much, but I love that they have stats for pugs anyway. You can have packs and swarms as well for animals to make them more dangerous. Then we get into bloodlines. So here we get into more rare types of vampires. So here we have more obscure disciplines like Daimonian for the Bali. They're basically infernalists, means they're Satanists. We've got Blood Brothers, Daughters of Cacophony, and we've got the Gargoyles. I mean, this is stuff that was all expansion content in the original game and now is just available to everybody, which is great. The Harbingers of Skulls, and they belong to the Sabbat. They are necromancers as well. We have the Kiasid, known as Weirdlings. They have a discipline called Mytherceria and Obtenebration as well, which is pretty cool. Nagarajas, they have Auspex dominate necromancy. Salubri, got Auspex fortitude and Obeya. And the Samedi, so these are an offshoot of the Nosferatu, essentially. They're mostly independent. Clan disciplines, fortitude, obfuscate, and thanatosis. So, the true Bruja. So they have Potens, Presence, and Temporis. This is about time. We have the Arimanes, that's a terrifying image, by the way. These have Animalism, Presence, and Spiritus. as their disciplines. Then we got the Anda. These have animalism, fortitude, and protean, and they're descended from the gangrel and gain animal features from frenzying. Got the Cappadocians, auspex, fortitude, and necromancy. You'll see more of them in the medieval knights rather than the modern knights. They have a tragic history, as it says here, illustrative of the parasitic cycle of kindred existence. Children of Osiris. Their disciplines are appropriate for the character's original clan, and they can also learn Bardo as an in-clan discipline. We have the Lamia. They have fortitude, necromancy, and potence. Bloodline of Canaanites devoted to defending Clan Cappadocian. We've got Lianan, not very numerous, but they're nicknamed the Druids, so they most resemble the native people from the British Isles, so the Celtic peoples. They have the disciplines of animalism, augum, and presence. We've got the Noyad with animalism, auspex, and protean, kind of the vampiric Vikings, if you like. Vampires of the Northern Lights. We have variations of the blood, so you can have some minor bloodlines and variations on different clans. Ravnos, Antitribu. Basically, Antitribu means you were embraced into that clan, but you kind of rebel against it, and you defect over to the other sect. So Malkavian, Antitribu would be in the Sabbat, have some different aspects to them. Then we got some other bloodlines, Assamite sorcerers, Assamite viziers. In the set, we have Daitya, warrior Setites, and Gangrel. We have some more bloodlines. We have two more Losombra, dominate Malkavians. We got Brahmin, Ravnos, Salubri, Wuzao. The Tremere have another bloodline here. The Kolduns for the Zemicha, and they practice Koldunic sorcery. Then we have additional disciplines for these new bloodlines. So we have Awakening of the Steel, which is combat mastery. This is about, using blades, essentially. Bardo, so this is attaining a state of mystical consciousness. It's not the same as achieving Golconda, but you can resist supernatural effects and regain humanity and stuff like that. Daimonian, so this is the black arts. So this is what Bali do. They use infernalism to manipulate people and to call up demons or fire from the realms below, and you can combine those things together. So for example, with 4 dots, you can combine your ability to read the psyche of a victim with the ability to summon up matter from the outer dark. So it pits a victim against the most dangerous, shameful parts of his own subconscious. Then condemnation gives a dark curse upon the victim, and a curse so foul that the victims attempt suicide after a single night, only to find that they can no longer die. So apparently some Bali can make curses that powerful. And then it gets even crazier from there. And then we have gargoyles, which have flight, which is amazing. Koldunic sorcery. So you spend blood points and have perfection of form and mastery of the appropriate lore. So you spend a blood point and roll attribute plus occult against the difficulty of the powers level plus 3. Then we have a bunch of different powers here for Koldunic sorcery, and there are different ways, which are elementally defined. So we have the way of earth, the way of wind, way of water, and all these have different levels of powers associated with them. The way of fire. And then we have Melpomene, the Greek muse of tragedy. Powers of this discipline explore the use of the voice for both benefit and harm. So you can throw your voice, you can project your voice to any individual you personally met. You can use music to sway the emotions of the listener and make them so powerful that they must act. You can spread madness, the sirens beckoning, and you can also entertain a much wider audience when you get to a higher level. And we have Mytherceria. This is a collection of powers that mimics the abilities of changelings. So you can cleave truth from lies. They have Fey sight, so they can see magic and other esoteric sources of power, but they can't detect the residue of ghosts or vampiric magic. It has to be energies from the Fey and other similar sources. They can see images and events and emotions by touching an object or area. However, they absorb the images, making them harder for other beings to access. They can also inscribe words on an object to disorient and befuddle anyone that sees it. Stick that on something valuable and befuddle somebody who tries to take it. And you can do the riddle fantastique, which is great. You whisper a riddle to an opponent and consumes their mind. They can't do anything until they solve the riddle, and nobody can help him. Answers provided by others, even correct ones, fail to counteract the affliction. How cool is that? Then you can steal the mind, absorb the mind, lots of other crazy stuff. So Obeya is from the Salubri. So this gives his practitioners a third eye in the center of the vampire's forehead when you master the second level. So it lets you heal a target's soul directly. So with the first dot, you can instantaneously read a target's injuries, know what must be done to save them. The anesthetic touch, you can ease a target's pain or place them into a deep soothing sleep with a touch. Corpore Sano can heal wounds with laying on of hands. Shepherd's Watch can create an invisible barrier from those under his care and those who would do them harm. And finally, Mensana, you can heal madness, quieting inner demons, and bringing a soul to peace. And it goes even further from there for elders, of course, but we'll skip that craziness. The Ogam discipline is only found amongst the Lianan bloodline. They share a splinter of dark, once vast and powerful forest spirit. They can tap into that spirit's power and into its communion with free spirits of its ilk. It's a limited form of blood magic, neither as flexible nor as powerful as Tremere thaumaturgy nor other clans' blood sorcery, but within the bounds set by the Lianan's territorial nature, it is quite powerful. So you can consecrate plant life in your territory. It will act in your defense against any unwelcome intruder. So trees will sway into their way, roots will entangle them, grass will grab their boots. Pretty cool. Then we have Crimson Woad. You trace mystical runes or script on your own body in Vitae, invoking spirits of war to infuse you and gird you for battle. You can describe the name of an enemy on her body. Baleful spirits are bound to the name and enact a curse upon the enemy. The moon and the sun, so you can trace ancient sigils of these two orbs on the body to gain gifts. The spirit of the moon blesses her, while the sun's spirit wards off some of that orb's fiery curse. And finally, you can drink dry the earth, so you can wrest spiritual energy out of places of power and use it to aid the Lianan. However, you might run into wizards and werewolves around the same site. Sanguinis is the unwholesome discipline granted to the Blood Brothers by the Zemicha who created them. So it's a relative of vicissitude that allows vampires to combine parts of their bodies, loan them out to others, and coordinate their minds and appendages. That's very unsettling. So yeah, you can donate limbs and organs to each other. You can develop a hive mind with your Blood Brothers. You can develop one vampire in several bodies, basically. You can have a coagulated entity, merging Blood Brothers together into a fleshy, bleeding mound of horror, surging forward, crushing and consuming anything in its path. Gross. Spiritus opens the vampire up to worlds and vistas that most kindred can never touch. Vampires are spiritually dead, unable to create life. The shamanic ritual that created the Aramanes, though, allowed a spiritual connection between the undead and the vast living world around them. That allows you to get aid from spirits, to summon spirit beasts, which is really not something that vampires can normally do. Calling up aspects of the beast to benefit the player, and it gives you multiple examples here. Angling Fury, spirits abound, and it allows you to take these spirits into yourself, break them down, and refresh your own mental reserves. So you gain points of willpower back from these spirits. Finally, you can get with a wild beast. You become a even more formidable predator than usual. Temporis allows you some control over time if you're a true Bruja. Hourglass of the Mind gives you a permanent alteration of a vampire's senses, greater sensitivity to time. Recurring Contemplation allows you to trap a target's mind into reviewing a set of events over and over until interrupted. It's pretty spooky. Leaden Moment, you can begin to alter the flow of time. You can slow the desired object almost to a dead stop. You can slow incoming bullets, Matrix style, or cause an enemy warrior to see the battlefield quicken to a blur of dizzying carnage, even as his every motion slows to a crawl. Patience of the Norns, you can suspend an inanimate object in time, keeping it frozen in perfect stasis. You can halt bullets outright and casually sidestep collapsing buildings. It's awesome. Finally, you have Clotho's Gift. You can momentarily accelerate time through yourself and move with the preternatural speed of celerity. However, the time dilation permits any type of action. You can still move or strike faster than the eye can see, but also think, plan, and evoke other disciplines that require full concentration. And then you can go even further from there, but it's a crazy powerful discipline. Now we have Thanatosis, exclusive development of the Samedi bloodline. First you have Hag's Wrinkles, giving perpetual rot to make a character's flesh malleable. You can store objects in your flaps of flesh like a kangaroo's pouch. Ugh. Putrefaction allows you to inflict decay with a touch upon a target, works on both living and undead. Ashes to Ashes, the character collapses into a thick white sticky powder. While in this form, the character cannot move and is only dimly aware of their surroundings, but is immune to fire and sunlight. So that's pretty useful. You can do Witherings, you can shrivel and render useless an opponent's limb. And finally, we have Necrosis, a horrific and potent form of putrefaction, causing flesh to decay and slough off, exposing the bone underneath. It can render opponent unable to move from lack of muscle tissue. Gross. And then you can go even further, of course, with the Elder Powers. Then you have Valerian, a warrior's discipline. This is for the Knights. Gives you the fabled third eye, much like the Obeah discipline. Level 1, you can learn the subject's illnesses and how to cure them. Anesthetic Touch. You can have a Burning Touch to bring searing pain. You can have the Armor of Cain's Fury, a phantom armor that protects you against most physical injury and Rotrek. And finally, the Vengeance of Samael, the Angel. So your third eye opens and changes to a furious icy blue. Any single attack you make automatically hits the target as mystic forces guide the blow. Then you got Visceratica, an extension of the gargoyle's natural affinity for stone and earth. So, Skin of the Chameleon. The gargoyle's skin takes on the color and texture of the surrounding environment. Scry the Hearthstone at 2 dots allows you to instinctively know where anyone is inside a structure. Bond with the Mountain allows you to sink into a stone surface until you wish to reappear, which is great for gargoyles to invade their masters' enemy strongholds, and then meld with the rock or stone walls and reappear the next evening. That's very cool. Armor of Terra. The gargoyle's skin hardens and becomes truly rock-like to the touch, and harder to harm even with fire, and grows inured to injury. Then you've got Flow Within the Mountain. You can flow through stone like lava working its way down a mountainside. So that's really awesome. Gargoyles are cool, by the way. Then we have our appendix. So this is where we get all the merits and flaws. There's millions of them, so I won't get into them, but you can spend points on flaws to regain points for your character during character creation, or you can spend points on merits, which give you little bonuses, like having an eidetic memory, having, various proficiencies. You could be a lawman's friend. You could be a Sabbat survivor. The number of points that the flaw costs will determine how debilitating it is, and also how many points you get back for character point expenditure. And likewise, the more points you spend on a merit, the more powerful it's going to be. Yeah. So there's a whole load of these to help you tweak character even more. Then you can create ghoul characters, and there's a whole process for that, which we won't go into. And there's an additional book on that as well in the V20 line if you want to get further. And there's the different experience levels for ghouls. You can see disciplines cost times 25, which is, you can't be very powerful as a ghoul. If you really want to go super street level, then you could be a ghoul in the game. You could be a war ghoul, or you could be a revenant. Yeah, there's some interesting depths to the ghoul side of things. Then we have the Rite, the rites of the Sabbat, described in more detail here. Creation rites, fire dances, games of instinct, sermons of Cain, the war party, the wild hunt, all kinds of interesting stuff they get up to. Then we have our game terms, glossary, and finally the index. So there you go. That is the Grand Masquerade edition of the Super Deluxe version of Vampire the Masquerade 20th anniversary. I've spent an absolute age talking about this book, but I do love it a great deal. So if you are looking to get into spooky season and you want to be a blood drinking monstrosity, I would strongly recommend V20 over V5 for the reasons I've already stated. There will be a lot to take in, more so than V5, and the rules are a little bit more complicated, but I think ultimately I just prefer the way it plays, and I can talk more about V5 in the future if people want to know the specifics of that, but I think they've done a bang up job of taking classic Vampire and updating it and tweaking it enough to make it just as enjoyable today as it was back in the 90s, but updating the lore and disciplines and all that stuff to fit with the world as it is, well, when this was made in 2011. So it's still already a little bit out of date, but, it's closer to how things are today. So it's nice to have that update to what was such a classic and momentous game in the RPG industry. So if you have any further questions about V20, be sure to ask me in the comments. I'm happy to talk about it as much as you like. I will be showing you the 2 books that I consider most key as far as supplements to this line, and those would be primarily Lore of the Clans and Rites of the Blood, which expand on blood magic, and the other gives you a huge number of new character options for every clan, which is just really good. So those are the 2 ones I consider kind of essential. Everything else is more optional and up to what you want to do, but I will talk about those in future videos. In the meantime, I hope you all stay well. Leave some comments below. Please click on like and subscribe and the bell to get notifications and all the good stuff. I really spend a lot of money, as you can see, on my RPG collection. If you do want to help me out with that, please do click on the Ko-fi link below. So with that in mind, take care, be well, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video as we continue into this year's spooky season. So take care, be well, and watch for the shadows behind you. Bye-bye.